Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. The first time I noticed the car, I didn't think much of it. It was parked across the street, just far enough to be unassuming. I figured it belonged to a neighbor's visitor or someone waiting for a friend. But when it was still there the next morning, I felt a slight unease settle in my chest. Days passed and the car never moved. Every evening when I got home from work, it was in the same spot. The make and model were nondescript, an older sedan, dark in color, with tinted windows. I never saw anyone inside, never saw the headlights flash or the engine start. It was just there. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that maybe the owner worked a night shift and left before I did in the morning. But curiosity got the better of me, and one night I watched from my window for hours. The car never budged. There was no movement inside, no flicker of a phone screen or the glow of a cigarette. One night I decided to walk past it. My pulse quickened as I approached, pretending to be casually checking my mailbox. As I neared the car, I tried to peek through the driver's side window, but the tint was too dark. There was no reflection, no shadow of a figure inside. I hesitated for a moment, then walked back to my house, feeling like I was being watched. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. A single footprint in the damp grass just outside my front door. It was faint, but distinct enough to tell me someone had been standing there. The car was still parked across the street, unmoving, unchanged, as if it had always been there. That night, I locked every door and double-checked the windows. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing outside, looking in. The thought sent a cold shiver through me, and I ended up staying awake until the first light of dawn crept through my blinds. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I called a friend and told them about the car. They laughed it off at first, saying it was probably just an abandoned vehicle. But when they came over that evening and saw it for themselves, their expression shifted. "That's weird," they muttered. "You sure no one's been in or out?" I shook my head. Not once. We decided to check it out together. My friend knocked on the driver's side window, then the passenger's. No response. They tried the door handle, but it was locked. "Maybe you should call the police," they suggested. "If it's been sitting here this long, someone needs to check it out." That night, I debated whether or not to call. What would I even say? That a car had been parked outside my house for days and I was paranoid about it, but something about it felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I finally dialed the non-emergency line, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They told me they'd send an officer to check it out. I waited by my window, watching as a patrol car pulled up next to the sedan. An officer stepped out, shining a flashlight into the tinted windows. I expected them to find nothing, but then they suddenly stiffened. The flashlight beam wavered, and the officer took a step back. I couldn't see what they had seen, but something was wrong. A second later, the officer reached for their radio, speaking in a hushed, urgent voice. Another patrol car arrived minutes later. I watched as they carefully opened the door, their movements cautious. They exchanged glances before one of them nodded and reached inside. I couldn't see what they were pulling out, but I saw the way their hands tensed, how they moved with a quiet urgency. After a few moments, one of the officers walked toward my house. My heart pounded as I opened the door. "Do you know who owns that vehicle?" they asked. I shook my head. I've never seen anyone get in or out. It's just been sitting there." The officer studied me for a moment, then let out a breath. "We found something inside," they said. "Something you should know about." My stomach twisted. "What is it?" They hesitated, as if choosing their words carefully. "There were photographs," the officer said slowly. "Dozens of them, all of you, your house, your car, you walking to and from work. Some of them are recent, taken from right outside your window." My blood ran cold. "What?" "We're looking into it now," the officer continued. "But whoever was watching you, they've been doing it for a while." I felt dizzy, like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My mind raced with questions. Who had been watching me? How long had they been there? And more importantly, where were they now? The officers took the car, promising to investigate. But even after it was towed away, the fear remained. I started noticing every shadow, every passing car. I double-checked my locks, never left my curtains open at night. But the worst part was knowing that whoever had been watching me had never been caught. And every now and then, I can't shake the feeling that they might still be watching. Story 2. I arrived at the office 10 minutes early, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The building was unusually quiet, even for after hours. I had received a message from my boss earlier in the day, requesting a private meeting at 7 sharp. It was a little odd since we never had meetings this late, but I figured it must be important. As I stepped out of the elevator onto my floor, I immediately noticed how empty it was. The lights were on, but every cubicle was vacant. The usual hum of computers and printers was absent, and the air felt unnervingly still. I glanced at my phone, checking the time to make sure I hadn't gotten the meeting details wrong. I walked toward my boss's office, my unease growing with each step. His door was slightly ajar, but there was no sign of him inside. The blinds were drawn, and his desk was clear except for a single notepad and a pen. I hesitated before calling out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Calloway?" There was no response. I took a step inside, looking around for any sign that he had just stepped away. His chair was pushed back slightly, as if someone had recently been sitting there. The notepad on the desk had a few scribbled words, but they were illegible from where I stood. A strange chill ran down my spine. I turned back toward the main office floor, my pulse quickening. Maybe he had left a note for me somewhere. I checked my email, but there was nothing new. As I scrolled through my messages, I noticed something unsettling. There was no record of his meeting request. I knew I had received it. I had read it multiple times, but now it was gone. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. The silence around me felt heavier now, more oppressive. I walked back toward my desk, hoping to find some kind of clue. As I passed the break room, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My breath hitched as I turned sharply toward the glass door. Nothing was there, but I had seen something or someone. I stepped closer, peering inside. The coffee machine's light blinked steadily, and a single chair was pulled out as if someone had been sitting there moments ago. The eerie sensation of being watched crept over me, making my skin prickle. I hurried back toward my desk, now desperate to grab my things and leave. As I reached for my bag, my computer screen flickered on. I hadn't touched it. My hands hovered over the keyboard as an unfamiliar document opened on its own. A single line of text appeared, typed out slowly as if someone invisible was controlling it. "Why are you here?" My heart pounded against my ribs. I backed away from the desk, scanning the room for any sign of another person. I was alone, at least. I should have been. My breathing became shallow as I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed my boss's number. The call rang once before going straight to voicemail. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think rationally. Maybe this was some elaborate prank. Maybe someone had hacked into my system. But why? And why now? The sound of a chair scraping against the floor shattered the silence. I whipped around toward the source, my body tense. One of the cubicles near the far end of the office had a chair that was now slightly turned, as if someone had just stood up. I took a cautious step forward, my breath coming in short bursts. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaking. No response. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. I needed to know what was happening. I approached the cubicle slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the edge, I peeked around the divider. No one was there, but the computer screen was on, displaying the same question that had appeared on my own. "Why are you here?" A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I turned on my heel, determined to leave the building immediately. As I made my way back toward the elevator, I noticed something else. The security cameras, they were pointed directly at me. Every single one had turned in my direction, their tiny red lights glowing like watchful eyes. My pulse thundered in my ears as I quickened my pace, nearly sprinting the last few feet. I jammed my finger against the elevator button repeatedly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The doors slid open, and I rushed inside, slamming the close button. As the elevator began its descent, I dared to glance back at the office floor. Standing just beyond the glass doors was a shadowy figure. It was tall, unmoving, and watching me. I couldn't make out any facial features, but I knew, without a doubt, that it was looking directly at me. The doors closed before I could process what I had seen. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity, the air thick with an unnatural silence. When the doors finally opened to the lobby, I rushed out without looking back. As soon as I stepped outside, my phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down at the screen. A new message. It was from my boss. "Sorry, had to reschedule. Let's meet tomorrow instead." I felt sick. I had spent the last 30 minutes in an empty office, experiencing something I couldn't explain. But what terrified me most wasn't just the eerie messages or the moving objects. It was the realization that whoever or whatever had been up there with me knew I was coming before I even arrived. Story 3. The morning air was crisp as I started my jog along the wooded trail. It was one of my favorite places to run, quiet, secluded, and surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the world. The dirt path twisted and turned, cutting through thick underbrush and patches of wildflowers. The only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of my footsteps and the occasional chirping of birds overhead. I had been running for about 15 minutes when something on the ground caught my eye. Scattered along the edge of the trail were several white zip ties, some still looped together, others cut or torn. A few feet away, a crumpled piece of silver duct tape lay stuck to a patch of dry leaves. I slowed to a stop, my breath heavy as I stared at the strange sight. At first, I thought it was just trash, maybe leftover supplies from a hiker or worker, but something about it didn't sit right. The zip ties were thick, the kind used for heavy-duty purposes, and the duct tape was wrinkled like it had been hastily ripped off something. A chill ran down my spine as I scanned the trees, suddenly feeling exposed. The trail was usually empty this early in the morning. I took a step forward, debating whether to ignore it and continue my run or turn back. That's when I saw more. A few yards ahead, a fresh strip of duct tape dangled from a low-hanging branch, swaying slightly in the breeze. My heartbeat picked up. Someone had left it here recently. The thought sent a wave of unease through me. Looking around, I didn't see anyone, but the dense forest made it easy for someone to be hiding. I took out my phone, considering calling someone, but hesitated. What would I even say? That I found some duct tape and zip ties in the woods. It sounded paranoid. Still, I snapped a quick picture and stuffed my phone back in my pocket. I continued forward, moving slower now, my senses on high alert. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. The usual peacefulness of the trail now seemed eerie, the silence pressing in on me. Then I saw a length of rope, frayed at the edges, half buried in the dirt. It was knotted at both ends. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just random litter. Someone had been here, and they had left these things behind for a reason. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was someone using this area for something sinister? Had someone been tied up here? I glanced around again, my skin crawling. I decided to turn back. My run was over. I picked up my pace, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig made my heart lurch. I told myself I was overreacting, but my gut told me otherwise. Something was very wrong. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I heard a branch breaking somewhere off to my left. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The trees were thick, casting long shadows, making it impossible to see who or what had made the noise. I listened, straining to hear anything else. The forest was silent. I took a cautious step back, my eyes scanning the trees. Then another sound, this time closer. The distinct crunch of leaves underfoot. Someone was there. I wasn't alone. My pulse hammered in my ears as I forced myself to move, walking briskly at first, then breaking into a run. I had never run so fast in my life. The path felt longer than I remembered, twisting through the dense trees, my legs burning as I pushed forward. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, focusing on the trail ahead, praying I'd reach the entrance soon. Finally, the clearing came into view. My car was parked just beyond the tree line, a welcome sight. I sprinted the last few yards, fumbling with my keys as I reached the door. I threw myself inside, locking the doors in one quick motion. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my entire body shaking. What had just happened? Had I really been followed, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I glanced back toward the trail, half expecting to see someone emerging from the trees. But there was nothing, just the quiet rustling of leaves in the wind. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. This time I wasn't going to second-guess myself. Someone needed to check that trail. When the dispatcher answered, I took a deep breath and told them everything. The zip ties, the duct tape, the rope, the feeling of being watched. They took it seriously. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived and an officer met me near the entrance. I retraced my steps with him, pointing out where I had found everything. He took notes, his expression growing more serious with each discovery. When we reached the spot where I had heard the noise, he paused, scanning the trees. "This isn't the first time we've had reports like this," he admitted, his voice low. "We've had hikers mention strange findings, bindings, tape, even blindfolds, but we never found anyone." A cold wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Someone had been using these woods for something dark, and I had nearly walked right into it. After taking my statement, the officer assured me they would investigate further. I nodded, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't coming back. Whatever was happening on that trail, I wanted no part of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I had stayed on that trail a little longer, if I had ignored the signs, if I hadn't turned back. The next day, I checked the news, half expecting to hear something about the woods, but there was nothing. No follow-up, no warnings, just silence. I don't know what I stumbled across that day, but I do know this: I'll never set foot on that trail again. Story 4. I first noticed the calls about a week ago. At exactly 2 a.m. my phone would ring, jolting me awake from sleep. At first I assumed it was a wrong number, someone dialing me by mistake. But when I picked up, there was only silence, except for the sound of faint breathing on the other end. I listened for a few seconds, waiting for the person to speak. When they didn't, I finally said hello. My voice was groggy, thick with sleep, but the only response was the rhythmic sound of breathing. It was slow and steady, like someone deliberately made me know they were there. A chill ran down my spine as I hung up. I convinced myself it was some prank, maybe an automated call glitching. But when it happened again the next night, I sat up in bed, staring at the screen. The call came from an unknown number, and when I answered, the same heavy breathing greeted me. I stayed on the line longer this time, waiting for something, anything, but the caller never spoke. After about 30 seconds, I hung up, my heart pounding. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that someone was out there, deliberately calling me in the dead of night. By the third night, I was starting to feel uneasy. I let the phone ring without answering, hoping whoever it was would get bored and stop. But the ringing continued, the shrill sound filling my dark bedroom. Eventually it stopped, only for my phone to buzz with a voicemail notification. I hesitated before pressing play. As expected, there was no message, only the sound of breathing, slow, controlled, and far too deliberate. My skin prickled, and I deleted it immediately, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. The next day, I blocked the number, relieved that I wouldn't have to deal with it again. That night, I went to bed feeling more at ease, thinking it was over. But at 2 a.m., my phone rang again. The number was different this time, still unknown. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. I let it ring until it stopped, but just like before, a voicemail followed. I played it, my fingers trembling slightly. The breathing was there again, but this time it was different, closer, heavier, as if the person was pressing the phone directly to their mouth. It sent a cold shiver down my spine, and I deleted it instantly. I barely slept that night, lying awake in the darkness, listening to the quiet of my apartment. Every sound felt amplified: the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the building settling. I kept my phone close, waiting, dreading. By the 5th night, I was exhausted. I decided to pick up, determined to end it. "Who is this?" I demanded the moment I answered. "Why do you keep calling me?" There was no response, only the steady, deep breathing. I felt my frustration growing, but beneath it was fear. "Say something or stop calling," I said, my voice shaking slightly. But the caller remained silent. I hung up, my pulse hammering. This wasn't some random prank. Whoever this was, they were doing this on purpose. They wanted me to know they were there. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? Someone keeps calling me and breathing into the phone. It sounded ridiculous. Instead, I installed a call tracing app, hoping to get more information if it happened again. That night, I left my phone on my nightstand, the screen facing up. As expected, the call came at exactly 2 a.m. I let it ring, my fingers gripping the sheets tightly. When it stopped, I checked the app, but the results were chilling. The call was untraceable. I barely slept after that, my paranoia growing with each passing night. I started noticing things that didn't seem right. My front door lock felt looser than usual. A strange footprint was in the dirt outside my window. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet, like someone was waiting just outside the edges of my awareness. By the seventh night, I was on edge. I sat up in bed, phone in hand, waiting. When the call came, I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail, but I didn't delete it right away. This time I listened carefully, straining to hear anything beyond the breathing. For the first time, there was a faint sound in the background. It was subtle, almost drowned out, but unmistakable, the creak of a floorboard. My breath hitched, my blood running cold. It sounded familiar. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding. That noise wasn't coming from somewhere distant. It was my apartment. Someone had recorded themselves inside my home. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone and racing to my front door. I checked the locks, my hand shaking as I flipped the deadbolt. My mind was racing. Had they been inside before? Were they watching me now? I called the police, barely able to keep my voice steady as I explained everything. They arrived within minutes, searching my apartment thoroughly. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing missing, nothing out of place. But when they checked the back door, they found something that made my stomach drop. A small piece of tape covered the latch, keeping it from locking properly. Someone had planned to come back. The officers took my phone, promising to investigate the calls. They advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, just in case. I packed a bag and left, my mind spinning as I drove to a friend's place. The calls stopped after that. The police never found the person responsible, but they suspected someone had been watching me for a while. The thought made my skin crawl. I moved a few weeks later, unwilling to stay in a place that no longer felt safe. I changed my number, got new locks, and installed security cameras. But even now, every time my phone rings in the middle of the night, I hesitate before answering. Story 5. It was late, far later than I had planned to be driving. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and seemingly endless, the only light coming from my headlights and the occasional flickering street lamp. I had been on the highway for hours, and exhaustion was starting to creep into my bones. That was when I saw him, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, his thumb out, signaling for a ride. At first, I hesitated. I never picked up hitchhikers, especially not this late at night. But something about him seemed different. He wasn't dressed like a drifter or someone looking for trouble. He wore a button-up shirt and slacks, his posture stiff, almost formal, as if he didn't belong out here at all. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. He stepped up to the passenger side window, his face barely visible in the dim light. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to get a better look at him. His voice was soft, almost distant, as he replied, "Just a few miles up the road, if you don't mind." I unlocked the door, and he slipped inside, his movements smooth and deliberate. There was something unsettling about the way he sat, too still, too quiet. I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe he was just grateful for the ride. I pulled back onto the road, trying to shake the feeling creeping up my spine. For the first few miles, we drove in silence. I glanced at him every so often, but he kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Been out here long?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "A while," he murmured. Something about his tone sent a shiver through me. I focused back on the road, suddenly eager to get into his destination. The highway was empty, no other cars in sight. The air inside the car felt colder than it should have, like the temperature had dropped the moment he got in. After a few more minutes, I glanced over at him again. My stomach dropped. The seat was empty. The man was gone. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard a sound. There was no way he could have just vanished. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I scanned the road, half expecting to see him standing there again, watching me. My heart pounded as I flicked on the interior light. The seatbelt lay neatly in place, as if no one had ever been sitting there. A chill ran down my spine, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end. I forced myself to breathe, to think logically. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But then I saw a small object lying on the seat where he had been. I reached over with a shaking hand, picking it up carefully. It was an old, tattered wallet. I flipped it open, my fingers trembling as I pulled out an ID card. The picture was faded, but the name was still legible. My blood ran cold. The item belonged to a man who had died years ago. I recognized the name instantly. It had been all over the news. He had gone missing on this very stretch of highway, his body never found. My hands shook as I stared at the picture, my mind racing. How was this possible? I slammed the wallet shut and tossed it onto the dashboard, my pulse hammering in my ears. I needed to get out of here. I pressed down on the gas, my car speeding forward into the darkness. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching on forever, but I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I did, I would see him sitting there, staring back at me. I drove straight through the next town, unwilling to stop until I reached the safety of my own home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. The wallet still sat on my dashboard, a silent reminder of what had happened. With hesitant fingers, I picked it up again. The weight of it felt real, solid. I wasn't imagining things. I stepped out of the car and made my way inside, locking the door behind me. The air in my house was warm, comforting, but the cold from the car still clung to my skin. I placed the wallet on the kitchen table and stared at it. My mind raced with questions. Had I really picked up a hitchhiker? Had he ever been there at all? The logical part of me wanted to believe I had simply hallucinated from exhaustion, but deep down I knew the truth. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his vacant stare, the way he had sat so unnaturally still. I could still hear his voice, distant and hollow, just a few miles up the road. The next morning, I called the police. I told them about the wallet, about the man I had picked up. They listened, their voices calm but skeptical. When they ran the name through their system, the officer's tone changed. "That's not possible," he muttered. "That man's been missing for over 20 years. They asked me to bring the wallet in. When I arrived at the station, they examined it carefully, their expression serious. One of the officers disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he held a file in his hand. "This was found on the side of the highway 20 years ago," he said, setting an identical wallet down in front of me. I stared at it, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. They were the same. Every scratch, every crease, every faded letter. "It doesn't make sense," I whispered. The officer nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't." I left the station feeling even more unsettled than before. The police had no answers, and neither did I. All I knew was that something impossible had happened on that highway, something that defied all logic. And as much as I wanted to forget, I knew I never would. Even now, every time I drive down that road, I feel it, the weight of unseen eyes watching me. And every so often, just out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a lone figure standing by the side of the highway, waiting. Story 6. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed softly as I stood in line, waiting to check out. It was late, and the store was mostly empty aside from the cashier and a man browsing the back shelves. I shifted the items in my hands, glancing at the reflection in the glass refrigerator doors. Everything seemed normal. but I still had the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes, rang up my items without much conversation. I pulled out a few bills, and he handed me my change, his fingers lingering against my palm for just a second longer than necessary. Then, in a whisper so low I almost didn't hear it, he said, "You're being followed." My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I looked up at him, expecting to see some kind of joke in his expression, but his face remained serious. His eyes flickered toward the entrance, and I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't want to turn around too quickly, but the weight of his words settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. My mind raced, trying to recall if I had noticed anyone behind me earlier. Forcing a calm expression, I grabbed my bag and stepped away from the counter. The automatic doors slid open with a quiet hum, and the warm night air rushed in. I kept my pace steady, not wanting to make it obvious that I was on edge. As I reached my car, I resisted the urge to glance over my shoulder, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. I unlocked my car, but before getting in, I casually turned my head. A man stood near the gas pumps, pretending to scroll on his phone. He was tall, wearing dark clothing, and something about the way he held himself sent a chill through me. I was certain I hadn't seen him inside the store, which meant he had been outside the whole time. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to decide what to do. If I drove straight home, would he follow me? My pulse pounded as I checked my mirrors, watching for movement. The man at the pumps didn't move immediately, but I noticed a car parked just a few spaces away. It wasn't running, but something about it felt off. I pulled out of the parking lot, keeping my speed normal, but every nerve in my body was screaming at me to drive faster. As I turned onto the main road, I saw headlights appear in my rearview mirror. My stomach clenched. The car from the lot was now behind me, matching my speed. I took a few random turns, hoping it was all a coincidence. Maybe the person just happened to be going the same way. But each turn I made, they followed. My breath came faster, and I knew I couldn't just go home. I needed to find a public place, somewhere with people. A diner came into view up ahead, its neon sign flickering. I turned sharply into the parking lot, hoping it would throw them off. I parked close to the entrance and jumped out, heading straight inside. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in, my heart still racing. I took a seat near the front, where I could see both the door and the parking lot. The waitress came over, and I ordered a coffee, trying to act normal. My hand still trembled slightly as I reached for the cup when she brought it over. I glanced outside, scanning the lot. The car that had followed me was now parked on the far side, away from the streetlights. The figure inside was barely visible, but I could tell they were still watching. The cashier's warning replayed in my head. He had known. He had seen something before I did. I debated going back to the store, asking him what he saw, but I wasn't sure I wanted to step outside again just yet. My phone buzzed on the table, and I quickly sent a message to a friend, letting them know where I was. Minutes passed, stretching out into what felt like hours. The car outside never moved. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone was parked outside. That wasn't illegal. But the fear gnawed at me, making my coffee taste bitter. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the car pulled out of the lot and drove away. I exhaled, my whole body sagging in relief. But the tension didn't leave. I waited a few minutes longer before paying and heading back to my car. My fingers hovered over the lock button, my eyes scanning every dark corner of the lot. I drove home cautiously, checking my mirrors every few seconds. No one followed me this time, but the weight of the night's events still pressed against my chest. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, making sure nothing seemed out of place. The house was dark, just as I had left it. Inside, I locked every door and window before finally letting myself breathe. I set my bag on the counter, my thoughts still racing. Who had been following me? Had they been watching me for a while, or was it just bad luck? And most importantly, how had the cashier known? The next day, I went back to the convenience store, needing answers. But when I walked in, the young man wasn't there. A different employee, an older woman, stood behind the counter. I asked about him, but she just shook her head. "No one like that works here," she said. "Maybe you're thinking of another store." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew I had been here. I remembered his voice, his face, but now it was as if he had never existed. I left without buying anything, stepping back into the daylight, feeling more unsettled than before. Even now, I still wonder who the cashier was and why he warned me. I never saw the man who followed me again, but sometimes when I'm out late at night, I still check my mirrors, just in case. Story 7. The job listing, it seemed perfect. The position matched my skills, the pay was better than my current job, and the company had decent reviews online. The interview had been scheduled quickly after I applied, almost too quickly, but I didn't question it. I was eager for a change and excited for the opportunity. The address they provided was in an older part of the city, an area I wasn't too familiar with. I arrived early, parking on the street and looking up at the building. It was tall and unmarked, its windows dark, giving no indication that a business operated inside. Something about it felt off, but I convinced myself I was just nervous. I walked up to the entrance and found the glass doors locked. There was no sign, no logo, nothing to indicate that the company I was interviewing for was inside. I double-checked the email on my phone, confirming I was in the right place. Confused, I knocked on the door, waiting for someone to answer. The knock echoed inside, the sound stretching longer than it should have. I stepped back, glancing up at the windows again. They were still dark, no movement inside, no sign of life. I checked the time 15 minutes early. Maybe they just hadn't arrived yet. A cold breeze swept through the street, making me shiver. I debated waiting or leaving. The whole situation felt strange. Just as I was about to turn away, I noticed a side entrance slightly ajar. The heavy metal door swayed ever so slightly, as if it had been left open for me. Hesitation gripped me, but curiosity won out. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The air was thick with dust, the scent of something old and untouched filling my lungs. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by a single flickering light. My footsteps echoed as I moved deeper inside. The place was silent, almost too silent. No hum of computers, no distant conversations, nothing to indicate an active business. My gut told me to leave, but my mind pushed forward, reminding me I had come for an interview. I reached what appeared to be a reception area. A desk sat in the middle, its surface covered in dust. A chair was pushed back, as if someone had stood up quickly and never returned. There were no computers, no papers, nothing that made it look like an operational office. Something wasn't right. I called out, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "Hello?" My words disappeared into the empty space, swallowed by the silence. No response. The air felt heavier now, thick with an unspoken presence. I checked my phone. No service. That didn't make sense. I had full bars outside. A chill ran through me as I turned back toward the door, suddenly feeling the urge to leave. But as I took a step, something caught my eye. A single elevator at the end of the hallway had its doors slightly open. A faint glow came from inside, the soft hum of electricity breaking the silence. My heart pounded as I approached, each step feeling like a mistake. I hesitated at the elevator doors, peering inside. The buttons glowed faintly, the number 5 already pressed. A part of me screamed not to step in, but something else, something deeper, made me curious. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The doors closed with a quiet hiss. The elevator jerked slightly before beginning its slow ascent. The numbers blinked as I passed each floor, the air growing colder. I gripped my phone tightly, watching the doors, my pulse hammering. The elevator stopped at the 5th floor. The doors slid open, revealing a hallway identical to the one downstairs. The same dim lighting, the same unsettling silence, but something was different. The air smelled wrong. I stepped out cautiously, scanning the hallway. Offices lined the walls, their glass doors revealing empty desks and overturned chairs. Papers were scattered on the floor, yellowed with age. It looked like the place had been abandoned for years. A noise made me freeze. A soft shuffle, like footsteps. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the sound. A shadow moved at the end of the hall, just out of sight. My body tensed, every instinct telling me to run. "Hello?" My voice cracked. Silence. Then, a whisper. Not words, just the sound of breath, long and slow. The hair on the back of my neck rose. I took a step back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The shadow moved again. This time it stepped into view. My stomach dropped. It was a man, or at least something that looked like one. His suit was outdated, his face pale and blurred, as if I was seeing him through fogged glass. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but as if reaching for me. My legs finally obeyed, and I turned, bolting toward the elevator. I slammed my hand against the button, praying the doors would open fast enough. Behind me, the whispering grew louder. The elevator doors slid open, and I stumbled inside, frantically pressing the close button. The doors began to shut, but just before they sealed, I saw him standing there, watching. No emotion, no expression, just waiting. The elevator shuddered as it descended. My breath came in gasps, my hands shaking. When the doors opened, I ran. Through the reception area, down the hall, out the side door. The street outside was quiet, unchanged, as if nothing had happened. I turned to look at the building one last time. The side door was closed now, locked as if it had never been open. The windows were dark, just like before. But now I knew why. I never applied to that company again. I never found out if the job listing had been real. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with the feeling that someone is watching me, waiting. Story 8. The sharp blare of the fire alarm jolted me awake. I sat up in bed, disoriented, my heart racing. The red light on the alarm in my apartment flashed in sync with the shrill ringing. I threw off my blanket and stumbled toward the door, the urgency of the sound pushing me forward. Smoke. That was my first thought. I sniffed the air, expecting the acrid scent of something burning, but the air was clean. Still, I couldn't ignore the alarm. Fires could spread fast, and I wasn't about to take any chances. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my phone, and rushed out the door. The hallway was empty. That struck me as strange, but maybe people were evacuating through the stairwell. I hurried to the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My pulse quickened as I realized I didn't hear anyone else. The building had dozens of residents, yet I seemed to be the only one moving. I pushed open the stairwell door and descended quickly, expecting to hear voices or hurried footsteps from other tenants. But there was nothing. Just the distant wail of the alarm. A creeping sense of unease settled in my stomach as I reached the ground floor and stepped outside. The night air was cool against my skin as I stood on the sidewalk, catching my breath. My apartment complex was a large, multi-story building, and normally fire alarms sent dozens of people scrambling outside. But I was alone. I turned back toward the building, my chest tightening. Something wasn't right. The alarm still screamed through the night, yet no windows lit up with concerned tenants peeking outside. No doors swung open with people stumbling out in confusion. I stared at the darkened windows, a shiver crawling up my spine. Had everyone somehow slept through it? That didn't seem possible. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, her voice calm and steady. I explained the situation, my words rushed. A fire alarm had gone off, but I was the only one outside. She paused before asking if I saw any smoke or flames. I looked up at the building again, scanning the windows and roof. Nothing. No fire, no smoke, just the eerie glow of the emergency lights in the hallways. I told her as much, and she assured me that someone would be dispatched to check on it. She told me to stay outside just in case. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. My skin prickled with the feeling of being watched, though there was no one around. The streets were empty, the parking lot silent, except for the distant hum of a passing car. I glanced at the security cameras mounted near the entrance, wondering if someone was watching me right now. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the night. A fire truck pulled into the parking lot, its flashing lights casting eerie red and white glows across the pavement. 2 firefighters stepped out, looking around as if expecting a crowd. Their eyes landed on me, and one approached. I told him everything: the alarm, the empty hallways, the silence. He nodded but seemed skeptical. His partner radioed in to check with dispatch, confirming that no other calls had come from the building. That detail made my stomach drop. If no one else had reported the alarm, had it been triggered just for me? The firefighters entered the building, disappearing inside while I remained outside, my nerves on edge. A few minutes later they returned, shaking their heads. No fire, no smoke, no sign of any danger. They reset the alarm, and the piercing sound finally stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. One of the firefighters asked if I had any reason to believe someone might have pulled the alarm as a prank. I hesitated, my mind racing. I didn't have enemies, and I hadn't noticed anything unusual before that night. But something about this felt deliberate. It didn't seem like a simple malfunction. They told me to return inside and assured me that if it happened again, I should report it immediately. I nodded, but the thought of going back inside alone unsettled me. Still, I couldn't stand outside all night. I walked back toward the entrance, my footsteps hesitant. The elevator doors were still open from when the alarm had gone off. I opted for the stairs, not wanting to risk getting stuck in a malfunctioning elevator. The stairwell was silent, each step echoing too loudly for comfort. When I reached my floor, I hesitated before opening the door. The hallway looked exactly as I had left it. Dim emergency lighting cast long shadows, making the space feel more ominous. My apartment door was still slightly ajar, the way I had left it in my rush. I stepped inside, locking it behind me. The quiet was deafening. I checked every room, even though I knew no one else had been inside. My apartment was just as I had left it, yet something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into a trap. The alarm had been meant to get me outside, but why? I double-checked the locks on my windows and doors before settling onto the couch. Sleep felt impossible, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone been watching me? Had they expected me to stay outside longer? The thought made my skin crawl. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I dozed off. When I woke up, the first thing I did was check my phone. No new messages, no calls, nothing unusual. But when I glanced at my door, my stomach dropped. The deadbolt was still locked, but the chain lock, the one I had latched before sleeping, was hanging loose. I stared at it, my blood running cold. Someone had been inside. Someone had been here while I slept. My breath hitched as I slowly turned, scanning the apartment, every shadow suddenly feeling like a threat. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the police. My voice trembled as I explained what had happened. They promised to send someone over, but I already knew they wouldn't find anything. Whoever had been inside was long gone. That morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't know who had triggered the alarm or how they had gotten inside, but I wasn't staying to find out. As I pulled away from the building, a single thought haunted me. The fire alarm hadn't been a prank. It had been a warning. A warning. Story 9. The first time I noticed the white van, it was parked at the far end of the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of cars lined the neighborhood, and a van wasn't anything unusual. But something about it stuck in my mind. Maybe it was the way it was positioned, slightly angled as if the driver had been watching. The next morning it had moved. It was still on my street, but a few houses closer. Again, I brushed it off, telling myself it belonged to a contractor or someone visiting. But the longer I stared at it, the more uneasy I felt. The windows were tinted dark, the kind that made it impossible to see inside. Each day the van crept closer. By the third morning, it was parked right across the street from my house. My unease turned to paranoia. I checked to see if anyone got in or out, but I never saw movement. It just sat there, like a silent observer. That night, I kept peeking through my curtains, waiting for some sign of activity. The van remained still, its presence looming in the dim glow of the streetlights. I considered going outside, getting a closer look, but something about it made my skin crawl. Instead, I locked my doors and tried to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next morning, it was even closer, this time directly in front of my house. My stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the van, zooming in on the license plate. But when I looked at the image, the plate was blurred, as if it had been intentionally covered. I decided to ask my neighbors if they had noticed anything strange. Most shrugged it off, saying they hadn't paid attention. One elderly woman mentioned seeing the van late at night, its engine running without headlights. That only made me more anxious. Who sat in a car at night without lights on? That evening, I sat in my living room with the blinds half open, watching the van. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was nothing, just someone waiting for a friend or scoping out a job site. But what if it wasn't? What if someone inside was watching me? I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house made me sit up, my heart pounding. When I finally dozed off, I woke with a start, convinced I had heard something outside. The van was still there in the morning, but now it was parked a little further up the driveway, like it was inching closer deliberately. I called the non-emergency police line, feeling ridiculous as I explained the situation. They asked if anyone had approached my house or tried to enter. When I said no, they told me there wasn't much they could do. Probably just a work van, the officer said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. Frustrated, I decided to take matters into my own hands. That night I walked outside, my phone recording as I approached the van. My pulse pounded as I neared the driver's side window, but I couldn't see inside. I knocked lightly, half expecting no response. Silence, no movement, but the hairs on my arms stood on end. I circled the van, looking for signs of life. The tires were muddy, like it had been driving on dirt roads recently. I reached for the handle on the back doors, but just as my fingers brushed it, a shuffling noise came from inside. My blood ran cold. I turned and walked quickly back to my house, locking the door behind me. My heart was hammering. That noise, it was soft but unmistakable. Someone was in there, and they knew I had been outside. The next morning, the van was gone. I felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. That night, when I got home from work, it was back, parked at the end of my driveway. My throat tightened. This was escalating. I called the police again, this time more insistent. They said they would send someone by to check, but an hour passed, and no one came. My anxiety reached a breaking point. I needed to leave, even if just for a night. I packed a bag and decided to stay with a friend across town. As I backed out of my driveway, I forced myself not to look at the van. But as I passed, my headlights swept across it, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. The passenger side door was slightly ajar. Someone had been inside. I sped off, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly they ached. At my friend's house, I barely slept, jumping at every sound. The next morning, I debated whether to go home, but I needed answers. I couldn't keep running. When I arrived back, the van was gone again. I felt another wave of relief, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I checked my security cameras, scrolling through the footage from the night before. My hands trembled as I watched. At around 3 a.m., the van's side door slid open. A shadowy figure stepped out, standing still for several minutes. Then they walked up to my front door. I watched, frozen, as the figure stood there, not knocking, not trying to break in, just standing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, they turned and disappeared back into the van. I felt sick. They had been that close, just standing outside my door in the middle of the night. I took the footage to the police, this time demanding action. They finally agreed to send a patrol car by my house at night, but I knew that might not be enough. Whoever was in that van wasn't just passing through. They had a reason for being there. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the empty street. Every passing car made my heart race. But the van didn't return. Maybe the police presence had scared them off. A week passed with no sign of it. I started to relax, telling myself it was over. But just as I was beginning to feel safe again, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a picture, a grainy image taken from outside my house. And there, just barely visible in the darkness, was the silhouette of the van, waiting, watching. I dropped my phone, my skin crawling with terror. They were still out there, and somehow they wanted me to know. Story 10. I came home late, exhausted from another long day at work. The house was dark and quiet, just the way I had left it that morning. I locked the door behind me, kicked off my shoes, and tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter. But something caught my eye, an object sitting in the middle of the table that hadn't been there before. A single key rested on the smooth wooden surface. It wasn't attached to a keychain, and it didn't match any of the ones I owned. I hesitated, staring at it, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I left it there? Had someone been in my house while I was gone? I slowly approached the table, my fingers hovering over the key before finally picking it up. The metal felt cool, unfamiliar, yet somehow deliberate. I turned it over in my palm, trying to place it, but nothing about it seemed familiar. My front door was locked when I arrived, and there were no signs of forced entry. I checked the windows, making sure they were secure. Everything was exactly as I had left it, down to the coffee cup I had forgotten to wash that morning. The key didn't belong to me, yet it was here, sitting as if someone had carefully placed it there for me to find. A sudden shiver ran through me. My house wasn't big, but at that moment it felt impossibly vast. I stood in the silence, listening for any sound, any indication that I wasn't alone. But all I could hear was the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. I moved toward the door, my hands tightening around the key. It didn't make sense. No one else had access to my house. I tried to push the thought away, convincing myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I had absentmindedly picked it up somewhere and forgotten about it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I placed the key back on the table and stepped away. My eyes flicked to my bedroom door, slightly ajar, though I was sure I had closed it before leaving that morning. My breath hitched as I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. Something felt wrong. I forced myself forward, slowly pushing the door open. The room was empty, just as I had left it. The bed was still unmade, my clothes from the night before tossed over the chair. But then, my gaze landed on my nightstand. The drawer was open. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. I never left it open. It was where I kept small valuables, spare cash, and an old photo album. My hands trembled as I pulled the drawer out further. Everything seemed untouched except for one thing. My spare house key was missing. I staggered back, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. It didn't make sense. If someone had taken the key from here, why would they leave a different one on the table? Was it a replacement? A message? A low creak echoed through the house. I spun around, every nerve in my body on high alert. The sound had come from the living room, just beyond the hallway. I wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone with shaky fingers, ready to call for help, but then something stopped me. Another noise, a faint click, like a door unlocking. I held my breath, my body frozen in place. The key. I crept back to the kitchen, my footsteps careful, almost silent. The key was gone. The empty space on the table made my stomach lurch. I turned toward the front door, half expecting to see it swinging open, but it was still closed, locked. Yet something was different. The air in the house felt heavier, charged, as if someone had been here only seconds ago. I moved cautiously toward the door, pressing my ear against it. Silence. My own breathing sounded too loud in the quiet. I reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be ice cold, but it was warmer than it should have been. I turned the lock, threw open the door, and stepped onto the porch, my eyes scanning the empty street. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the distant streetlights. I looked down, my breath catching in my throat. The key was sitting on the doormat. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door behind me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something I could explain away. Someone had been here. Someone had taken the key and left it outside, as if to prove they could. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I grabbed the key again, gripping it tightly. If this was a warning, I needed to take it seriously. I spent the next hour checking every inch of my house. Closets, under the bed, behind doors, anywhere someone could hide. But there was nothing. No sign of forced entry. No signs that anyone had been here at all. Except for the key. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me flinch, every shadow seemed darker, stretched longer than it should have been. I kept the key beside me, unwilling to leave it unattended. It felt wrong to throw it away, as if doing so would make things worse. Morning finally came, bringing a false sense of normalcy. The key remained where I had left it, unmoving, waiting. I debated changing the locks, moving, calling someone, but what could I even say? That a key appeared in my house, then disappeared, then reappeared again. I decided to leave the house for a while, needing space to clear my head. As I stepped outside, the fresh air did little to ease my nerves. I glanced up and down the street, searching for anything unusual. Then I saw it. A car parked across the street, a figure sitting inside, watching. I turned to go back inside, but I stopped short. There, hanging from my front doorknob, was the key. Someone had put it back. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with what to do. The car hadn't moved. The figure remained still. Then, as if knowing I was watching, they slowly reached up and held something out the window. Another key. An exact replica of mine. And in that moment I realized I would never truly be alone in this house again. Story 11. The knock came just after midnight. It was soft but insistent, a rhythmic tapping against the wooden door. At first I thought I had imagined it, the sound barely loud enough to register over the hum of my television. But when it came again, more deliberate this time, I stood up, feeling a strange unease settle over me. Peering through the peephole, I saw a child standing on my porch. He looked no older than 6 or 7, dressed in a simple t-shirt and shorts despite the chill in the air. His face was eerily blank, expressionless in a way that made my stomach twist. He raised his hand and knocked again, slower this time. I hesitated before unlocking the door, but didn't open it completely. "Hey there," I said cautiously. "Are you lost?" The boy tilted his head slightly and stared at me, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, in a quiet, almost mechanical voice, he asked, "Can I come in?" The question sent a shiver down my spine. There were no houses close enough for a child to have wandered over alone, and I saw no adults nearby. "Where are your parents?" I asked. The boy didn't answer. He just stood there, his arms hanging limply at his sides, waiting. I stepped back, my grip tightening on the door handle. "I can call someone for you," I offered, my pulse quickening. Still, he didn't react. Just as I was about to close the door, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, let me in." Something about the way he said it, so emotionless and direct, made my skin crawl. My instincts screamed at me to shut the door, to lock it and walk away. But a small part of me hesitated. What if he really was just a lost child? What if he needed help? I glanced around the yard, searching for movement, but the night was still. No parents, no approaching figures. "I'll call the police," I said finally. "They can help you get home." The boy blinked once, then again, as if the words confused him. "No," he said softly, "just let me in." My throat felt dry. "I don't think I can do that." The boy's face didn't change, but something in his posture did. His shoulders straightened, his head tilting just a little further to the side. "You don't want me to be out here," he murmured. "It's not safe." A chill passed over me, colder than the night air. The way he said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, made my stomach twist. "I think you should wait right here," I said, backing away. I grabbed my phone from the counter, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. When I looked back, he was still standing there, motionless. My fingers trembled as I dialed, pressing the phone to my ear. But as soon as I heard the ring, the boy knocked again, louder this time. "Please," he said, his voice sharper, more urgent. I nearly dropped the phone. The sudden shift in his tone sent panic racing through my veins. "I'm calling someone to help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But before I could say anything else, the call cut out. The screen went dark, my battery dead even though it had been at 60% just minutes before. My breath hitched. I stared at the blank phone screen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. When I looked up again, the boy had moved closer. He was now standing just inside the doorway, 1 foot past the threshold. I hadn't heard him step forward, hadn't seen him move. My heart pounded as I stumbled back. "Get out," I whispered, my voice shaking. The boy didn't move. He just stared, his dark eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have opened the door," he said softly. A wave of dread crashed over me. I lunged for the door, grabbing the handle to shove it closed, but the boy was faster. His small hand shot out, pressing against the wood with unnatural strength. "It's too late now," he murmured. My vision blurred with panic. I pushed against the door with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The boy didn't look like he was exerting any effort at all. "What do you want?" I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. The boy's lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. "I just needed an invitation," he whispered. A deep, primal fear gripped me. I slammed my shoulder against the door, trying to force it closed, but the boy didn't flinch. The air around him felt wrong, heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. "You let me in," he said, his voice taking on an eerie, almost melodic quality. "Now I can stay." Terror clawed at my chest as the lights in my house flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting and shifting as if they were alive. The boy took another step inside, and suddenly the air grew thick, suffocating. My ears rang with a distant, whispering sound, like voices just out of reach. With one final surge of desperation, I yanked the door forward with everything I had. The force sent me stumbling back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I locked it, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the deadbolt. Silence. I pressed my ear to the wood, straining to hear anything. The night was still again, as if nothing had happened. I waited, my heart hammering, but the knocking didn't come back. Cautiously, I peered through the peephole. The boy was gone. I exhaled shakily, every muscle in my body tense. My house felt different now, colder somehow. I backed away from the door, my skin crawling. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sent my pulse racing. Every flicker of movement outside my window made my stomach clench. But by morning, the world seemed normal again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That I had let something in, something I couldn't take back. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a soft knock at the door. Story 12. As I was falling asleep, I heard a voice whisper, "I see you." My eyes snapped open, heart pounding against my ribs. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my nightlight, casting shadows along the walls. I strained my ears, wondering if I had imagined it. Silence stretched across the room, but my body remained rigid with unease. I scanned the corners, my breath shallow and uneven. Maybe it had been a dream, the kind that clings to reality just long enough to feel real. I rolled onto my side, trying to shake the eerie feeling creeping up my spine. Just as my eyes fluttered shut, I heard it again. "I see you." This time the voice was unmistakable, coming from under my bed. My pulse hammered as I lay frozen in place. The rational part of me whispered that it had to be my imagination, but deep inside, something told me I wasn't alone. Slowly, I pulled the blanket up to my chin, as if that could protect me from whatever was lurking beneath. I thought about turning on the lamp, but that would mean reaching across the bed, leaving myself vulnerable. I needed to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. I forced myself to take a deep breath and leaned slightly over the edge of the bed. My fingers fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, the dim light of the screen illuminating the darkness. I hesitated, then held my breath and lowered my phone, using the reflection on the screen to see underneath. Nothing. Just the bare floor and the shadowy outline of my bed frame. My shoulders slumped with relief. It must have been my imagination after all. Shaking my head, I set my phone down and settled back against the pillow. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself into sleep. Then, just as my breathing slowed, something grabbed my ankle. A sharp yelp escaped my lips as I kicked out wildly, scrambling backward until my back hit the headboard. My heart slammed in my chest as I stared down at the foot of my bed, but nothing moved. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as I swallowed down my fear. I knew I had felt something fingers, cold and firm, curling around my skin, but there was nothing there now. I reached for my phone again, my hands trembling as I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor. I exhaled shakily when it revealed nothing unusual. No footprints. No sign that anything had been there. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, or some mix of both. I had to be imagining things. Clutching my blanket tightly, I shifted under the covers, trying to shake the lingering unease. Minutes passed in silence, but sleep refused to come. My body remained tense, waiting for something else to happen. Just as I started to convince myself it was over, a low chuckle echoed from beneath me. The sound sent a jolt of terror straight through my bones. My hands clenched the sheets as my breath hitched in my throat. It was real. Someone or something was under my bed. I fought against the panic rising in my chest, trying to think clearly. I couldn't just stay there, waiting. I needed to get out. Slowly, I slid my legs over the edge, careful not to make any sudden movements. The moment my feet touched the floor, the voice whispered again. "Where are you going?" A chill ran down my spine as I bolted for the door, fumbling with the handle before yanking it open. I stumbled into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the living room, where the glow from the streetlights outside offered some sense of safety. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to make sense of what just happened. There had to be an explanation. I paced back and forth, running a hand through my hair. I could wake my parents, tell them someone was in my room. But what if they found nothing? I didn't want them thinking I was losing my mind. Steeling myself, I crept back down the hall, peering cautiously into my room. The air was still, my bed exactly as I had left it. I hesitated, then stepped inside, my pulse quickening. I knelt down, and with shaking hands, lifted the edge of the blanket. My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the darkness beneath my bed. It was empty, completely empty. I sat back on my heels, confusion clouding my fear. There had been a voice, a presence. I had felt something grab me, yet there was nothing. No sign of anything unusual at all. For the rest of the night, I sat curled in the corner of my bed, back against the headboard, watching and waiting. But nothing happened. No whispers, no laughter, no touch, just silence. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but the fear hadn't left. I hesitated before stepping out of bed, half expecting something to grab me again. When nothing did, I exhaled in relief. I spent the day trying to push the experience from my mind, convincing myself it had been a waking nightmare. But as night approached, the unease crept back. I avoided my room for as long as I could, but eventually I had to return. I forced myself to move slowly, methodically, checking under the bed before lying down. It was empty. Still, I left the light on, just in case. As sleep finally took hold, a whisper slithered through the dark. "I see you." Story 13. The boutique was small and quiet, tucked away on a side street I had never noticed before. I had only wandered in out of curiosity, drawn by the dim lighting and the racks of vintage clothing arranged neatly near the entrance. A woman at the front counter greeted me with a polite nod but said nothing as I browsed. The store had an odd atmosphere, the kind that made it feel like time moved differently inside. After flipping through a few racks, I picked out a deep green dress and a fitted jacket to try on. The dressing rooms were in the back, separated by heavy curtains rather than doors. The lighting inside was dimmer than I expected, casting soft shadows along the floor. The mirror took up nearly the entire back wall, reflecting the space with an eerie stillness. I slipped into the dress, adjusting the hem as I turned side to side. The fabric was soft, the fit almost perfect, but something about my reflection caught my attention. It looked normal at first glance, but as I moved, there was a fraction of a second where it didn't quite follow me. My heart skipped a beat as I froze, staring hard at my own face. I lifted my hand slowly, watching my reflection do the same. I turned my head left, then right, but the unease didn't fade. There was something wrong. The movements weren't as fluid as they should have been, as if there was a tiny delay. I swallowed hard, telling myself I was imagining things. Just as I was about to shake it off, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection, the store behind me looked slightly different, subtle things, like the placement of the curtains and the way the clothing rack stood. It was barely noticeable, but now that I had seen it, I couldn't unsee it. My chest tightened as a terrible thought crept into my mind. Slowly, I took a step closer to the mirror, leaning in just enough to inspect it. I placed my fingertips against the cool surface, pressing lightly. The moment I did, a faint shadow shifted behind the glass, too deep to be a simple reflection. My breath caught in my throat as realization set in. This wasn't just a mirror. It was a two-way window. A wave of nausea rolled through me as I stepped back, my mind racing. Someone was on the other side. Someone had been watching me the entire time. My skin prickled with a horrible awareness as I fought the urge to yank the curtain open and run. I didn't want to alert whoever was behind that glass that I knew. I forced myself to stay calm, to act as if I hadn't noticed anything. Swallowing my fear, I turned back to my reflection and adjusted the dress again, pretending to examine the fit. My hands trembled as I reached for my jacket, slipping it back on with careful, deliberate movements. I needed to get out of there without drawing attention. Taking a slow breath, I pulled the curtain aside and stepped out, my pulse hammering in my ears. The store was as quiet as before, the woman at the counter still in her spot, her expression unreadable. I walked up casually, trying to steady my voice as I handed her the dress. "I'll pass on this one, thanks." She nodded without a word, her fingers tapping lightly on the counter. Something about the way she watched me made my stomach churn. Did she know about the mirror? Was she in on it? I forced a polite smile, turning toward the door with measured steps. I could feel her gaze on my back the entire way. The moment I stepped outside, a rush of cold air hit me, making me realize how stifling the boutique had been. I walked quickly, resisting the urge to break into a sprint until I was far enough away. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, dialing the non-emergency police line. The operator listened as I explained what I had seen, my voice tight with nerves. "It was a two-way mirror," I said, gripping my phone tighter. "I don't know who was behind it, but someone was watching." The woman on the line took down the details, assuring me they would send someone to check it out. I hesitated before hanging up, my eyes flicking back toward the shop. From the outside it looked normal, just another small boutique among dozens in the city. But now that I knew what was inside, it sent a chill through me. I stepped back, blending into the crowd before finally turning away. That night, I kept my phone close, half expecting a call from the police. Hours passed with no word. Unable to sleep, I searched online for the boutique, but nothing came up. No website, no business listings, not even a mention on review sites. It was as if the store didn't exist. The next morning, I walked back to the street, my stomach twisting with unease. When I reached the spot where the boutique had been, I stopped dead in my tracks. The storefront was empty. The windows were covered in newspaper, and a sign on the door read "For Lease." It was as if the shop had vanished overnight. A cold dread settled over me as I stepped closer, peering through a gap in the paper. The interior was bare, stripped of all evidence that it had ever been a functioning store. No racks, no counter, no dressing rooms, just an empty, dust-covered space. I turned away quickly, my heart pounding. I knew what I had seen. That store had been there just yesterday. Someone had taken it down or razed it before anyone could investigate. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Whoever had been behind that mirror had been watching people for a long time, and now they were gone, vanishing just as easily as they had appeared. The worst part was knowing I had no answers, no way of knowing how many others had stepped into that dressing room before me, or how many would step into another just like it somewhere else. Story 14. It was late afternoon when I decided to take a walk through the park. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pathway. The park was nearly empty, the usual chatter of families and joggers replaced by the occasional rustling of leaves. I walked slowly, enjoying the quiet, until something caught my eye near one of the benches. A suitcase sat unattended beside the bench, slightly tilted as if someone had left it in a hurry. It was black, medium-sized, and looked relatively new. There was no one around, no sign of an owner. I glanced around, expecting someone to come back for it, but the park remained still. Curiosity gnawed at me as I approached the suitcase. I hesitated, wondering if I should mind my own business, but something about it felt off. It was positioned too deliberately, not carelessly forgotten. I nudged it lightly with my foot, and it barely moved, as if something heavy was inside. I bent down and checked for any tags or identification. There was nothing, no airline tag, no name, nothing to indicate who it belonged to. A small lock dangled from the zipper, but it was unlatched. My fingers hovered over the handle as I debated whether to open it. Against my better judgment, I pulled the zipper slowly. As the suitcase opened, a wave of nausea hit me. Inside, wrapped in clear plastic, was something unmistakably human. A hand, pale and lifeless, was pressed against the plastic, fingers slightly curled. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The plastic was tightly wrapped, concealing most of the body, but there was no doubt it was a person. The weight of the suitcase suddenly made sense. My heart pounded as I looked around, expecting someone to be watching me. The park remained eerily silent. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. My voice came out uneven as I reported what I had found. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking me to stay where I was until officers arrived. I backed away from the suitcase, afraid that whoever had left it might still be nearby. Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, my eyes darting to every shadow. When the police finally arrived, they wasted no time securing the area. An officer approached me, asking questions, but my mind was still reeling. I told them everything, how I had found it, how I had opened it, how there was no one else around. They moved with careful precision, inspecting the suitcase without disturbing its contents. One officer radioed for backup, while another began scanning the park. I overheard bits of their conversation, words like recent, no decomposition, and we need forensics. The weight of what I had stumbled upon hit me like a brick. A detective arrived shortly after, taking over the scene. He asked me to recount everything again, this time in more detail. I did my best, but I kept glancing at the suitcase, at the horror I had uncovered. The detective assured me they would review park security footage and try to determine when it had been left there. As they worked, I stepped further back, feeling the need to distance myself from the scene. I realized how empty the park had been when I arrived, how eerily quiet everything had felt. Had someone been watching me? Had I interrupted something sinister? The officers eventually escorted me to their car to take an official statement at the station. They assured me I wasn't a suspect, just an unfortunate bystander who had stumbled upon something horrifying. The drive to the station felt surreal, my mind replaying the moment I unzipped the suitcase over and over. At the station, they asked if I had noticed anyone suspicious. I struggled to remember every detail of my walk before finding the suitcase. There had been an older man feeding birds near the fountain, a couple jogging past, but no one who seemed out of place. No one lurking, no one running away. They thanked me for my cooperation and advised me not to discuss the discovery with anyone yet. The case was now an active investigation, and they needed to piece together what had happened. I nodded, still numb, as they let me go. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the suitcase, the hand pressed against the plastic. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that person? Why were they left in the middle of a public park? Was the killer still nearby when I found it? Over the next few days, the news picked up the story. Authorities remained tight-lipped about details, only confirming that an unidentified body had been found. They urged anyone with information to come forward, but no one did. No missing persons matched the description. No one came forward to claim they had seen anything suspicious. Weeks passed, and despite the investigation, the case remained unsolved. The suitcase haunted me, a grim reminder of something far darker than I ever wanted to encounter. Every time I walked through the park, I felt a lingering unease, as if I had glimpsed something I was never meant to see. Then, one evening, I received an anonymous note slipped under my apartment door. It was a single piece of paper with only 5 words: "You should have left it closed." My breath hitched as I read it over and over, my hands trembling. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a threat? A warning? A taunt? I reported the note to the police immediately. They took it seriously, checking surveillance footage from my building, but whoever had left it had avoided the cameras. There were no fingerprints, no clues to who had sent it. I felt a growing sense of paranoia, watching every shadow, jumping at every sound. I stopped going to the park, stopped taking my usual evening walks. The sense of normalcy I once had was gone. The suitcase had changed everything. Someone out there knew what I had seen, and I had no way of knowing if they would come back. Days turned to weeks, and the note remained the only sign that someone had been watching me. The case faded from the news, the public losing interest, but I never forgot. The image of that hand pressed against the plastic still haunted my dreams. Even now, I check my doors twice before bed. I keep my curtains drawn, my phone within reach. And every time I step outside, I scan the crowd, wondering if the person who left that note is still watching me. Story 15. I left for work that morning like any other day. My apartment was exactly as I left it, keys in my pocket, door locked behind me. The routine was automatic, something I did without thinking. Nothing seemed out of place as I stepped into the crisp morning air. Work dragged on, the usual monotony of emails and meetings filling the hours. I barely paid attention to the clock until it was time to head home. My thoughts were on dinner and the new show I had planned to start. I reached my apartment building, relieved to finally be back in familiar surroundings. I pulled out my key and slid it into the lock, but it didn't turn. Confused, I tried again, jiggling it slightly as I always did. The lock didn't budge, as if it were an entirely different mechanism. A cold prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I double-checked the number on the door, though I knew I hadn't made a mistake. This was my apartment, there was no question about it. I tried again, pushing harder, my key scraping uselessly against the metal. The lock had been changed. Panic started to rise in my chest as I knocked on the door. I waited, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. There was no response, no movement inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Had my landlord replaced the lock without telling me? Had someone broken in? I pulled out my phone and called the landlord immediately. The call rang for what felt like forever before he finally picked up. I explained the situation, my voice slightly unsteady. There was a pause before he spoke, his tone confused. "I didn't change the lock," he said. "Are you sure you're at the right place?" His words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I assured him I was standing in front of my own door. I asked if he could come by to check, but he hesitated before agreeing. He told me it would take a little while, and I had no choice but to wait. I stood there in the dim hallway, feeling strangely out of place in what should have been my own home. Something was very wrong. I knocked again, harder this time, hoping that maybe someone inside would answer. The silence on the other side of the door was deafening. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear even the faintest noise. There was nothing. I stepped back, glancing around the hallway. Everything looked the same, but it all felt unfamiliar now. The air seemed heavier, the lights flickering just enough to put me on edge. I checked my key again, turning it over in my palm, trying to make sense of it all. The landlord arrived about 20 minutes later, his face set in a look of mild concern. He greeted me and pulled out his master key. He slid it into the lock and tried to turn it. The key didn't work. His brow furrowed as he tried again, this time with more force. "That's strange," he muttered. He stepped back, rubbing his chin, then knocked on the door himself. We both waited, but again there was nothing. He pulled out his phone and double-checked his records, muttering under his breath. No maintenance orders, no request for a lock change. He looked at me uneasy. Who would have changed it? A chill settled in my stomach as I thought of an answer. No one should have access to my apartment but me and the landlord. If he hadn't changed it, that meant someone else had. "I need to get inside," I said firmly. My voice was steadier than I felt. The landlord nodded and said he'd call someone to drill the lock open. I stood by, feeling more like a stranger in my own life with every passing second. Minutes dragged on until a locksmith arrived. He worked quickly, drilling into the mechanism until the lock finally gave. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, bracing myself for what I might find. My stomach twisted as I took in the scene. Everything was gone. Was gone. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no pictures, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. It was just 4 bare walls and an eerie silence. My chest tightened as I turned to the landlord, who looked just as bewildered as I felt. "Are you sure this is your place?" he asked, his voice quiet. I wanted to snap at him, but my words caught in my throat. Of course I was sure, but the evidence in front of me said otherwise. I stumbled inside, searching desperately for any trace of my things. The kitchen was stripped bare, the bedroom hollow and cold. Even the closet, where I had left my coat that morning, was empty. It was as if I had never lived here at all. I turned back to the landlord, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "Where's my stuff?" My voice barely sounded like my own. He shook his head, unable to answer. He called the building's security to check the cameras. I clung to that sliver of hope, needing proof that I hadn't lost my mind. We waited as the footage was pulled up. The screen flickered to life, showing the hallway from that morning. I watched myself leave for work, locking the door behind me. The hours ticked by, the hallway remaining undisturbed. Then, just a few minutes before I returned, the footage glitched. When it cleared, the door was different. The lock had changed. No one had entered. No one had left. The apartment had simply changed. A deep unease settled into my bones as I stepped back, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. The landlord stared at the screen, his face pale. I don't understand," he whispered. Neither did I. But one thing was certain. My home, my life had been erased, and I had no idea how or why. Story 16. It was past midnight when I drove down the quiet, empty streets toward home. The streetlights cast pools of yellow on the pavement, flickering slightly as I passed under them. I wasn't in a hurry, just enjoying the calm of the night, when I noticed a girl sitting alone at a bus stop. She looked young, maybe in her late teens or early 20s, and she had a small bag resting beside her feet. There was something strange about seeing someone waiting for a bus this late. The routes had stopped running an hour ago, and this part of town was mostly deserted at night. She sat perfectly still, her hands in her lap, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. As I slowed at the nearby stoplight, I glanced at her again, something nagging at the back of my mind. Her clothes looked slightly outdated, like they belonged to another time. The way she sat rigid, unmoving, made me uneasy. The light turned green, and I hesitated for just a second before deciding to pull over. Maybe she was stranded, waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. I turned into a small parking lot across the street, intending to check if she needed help. I looked down for only a moment to put my car into park. When I lifted my head again, she was gone. The bus stop was empty, except for her bag, which was still sitting exactly where she had left it. A shiver ran through me, and I sat there for a long second, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I scanned the street, expecting to see her walking away, but there was no one. The nearest alley was at least 20 feet away, and I hadn't looked away long enough for her to have disappeared completely. My stomach tightened as I tried to make sense of it. She had been sitting right there. Where could she have gone? Curiosity won over my hesitation, and I got out of the car, walking toward the bus stop. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic from the main road. As I got closer, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The bag was still there, untouched, as if she had meant to come back for it. I hesitated before kneeling down to examine it. It was a small canvas backpack, slightly worn, with no name tag or distinguishing features. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. I glanced around again, half expecting the girl to reappear, but the street remained empty. I finally reached out and unzipped the main pocket. Inside, there were only a few things: a notebook, an old flip phone, and a faded photograph. The notebook's cover was soft from wear, and when I opened it, I saw pages filled with handwriting. Some of the words were smudged, as if written in a hurry. The first few entries were ordinary notes about daily life, errands, reminders, but as I flipped through, the handwriting became more frantic. One entry caught my eye. "He's following me again. I don't know how he finds me, but he does. Every time I think I've escaped, he's there watching." My fingers tensed around the paper as I read on. The entries continued in the same anxious tone, talking about a shadowy figure that always seemed to know where she was. The last entry was dated only a few days ago. I think this is it. If you find this, please understand I didn't run. He took me. A cold chill ran down my spine as I read the words again, my hands suddenly unsteady. I grabbed the old flip phone from the bag, pressing the power button, but it didn't turn on. The battery was probably dead. My gaze fell to the last item, the faded photograph tucked inside the notebook's back cover. It was a picture of a girl, smiling, with another person's arm wrapped around her shoulders. I looked closer and felt my stomach drop. The girl in the photo was the same one I had seen at the bus stop, but something was wrong. The photograph had a timestamp in the bottom corner, 15 years ago. My breath hitched as I looked back at the empty bench, the reality of the situation sinking in. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I even say? That I had seen a girl who disappeared into thin air. That I had found a bag belonging to someone who, by all evidence, had been missing for over a decade. My pulse pounded as I tried to think. Then I heard a sound behind me. A faint shuffle like footsteps on pavement. I turned sharply, my heart hammering, but there was no one there. The street remained empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how alone I was. I grabbed the bag and hurried back to my car, locking the doors as soon as I got inside. My hands trembled as I set the bag in the passenger seat. I needed to take it to the police. Maybe they would recognize the name from the notebook or match the photo to a missing persons case. As I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone following me. But the roads were quiet, and nothing moved in the shadows. Still, the eerie feeling lingered, wrapping around me like a second skin. I had seen her. I knew I had. But she was gone now, leaving only a bag full of questions. The next morning, I went straight to the police station, explaining what had happened. The officer at the desk listened, taking the bag and flipping through the notebook. His face darkened when he saw the photo. He excused himself and disappeared into the back. Minutes later, another officer approached me. "Where did you find this?" His tone was sharp, his expression unreadable. I told him everything, from seeing the girl to discovering her bag. He exchanged a glance with his partner before sighing. This girl, she disappeared 15 years ago. Her case was never solved. My skin went cold as his words sank in. But I saw her, I insisted. She was sitting at the bus stop last night. The officer shook his head. "That's not possible." I left the station feeling even more unsettled. The girl had been real, I knew it. But if she had vanished 15 years ago, then who had I seen? And why had she disappeared all over again, leaving behind a bag filled with fear and unanswered questions? Even now, I sometimes drive past that bus stop late at night, hoping to see her again. But the bench is always empty, and the only thing that remains is the feeling that someone is still there, waiting. Story 17. I picked up my prescription from the pharmacy like I always did. It was a routine errand, something I never thought twice about. The pharmacist handed me the small paper bag with a polite nod, and I left without checking inside. I was halfway home when I noticed something felt off. The bag was heavier than usual. At a red light, I reached inside and pulled out my usual medication bottle, but my fingers brushed against something else. I dug deeper and found an extra bottle. It was completely blank, no label, no branding, nothing to indicate what was inside. A chill ran through me as I held it up to the light. It was identical to my usual prescription bottle, but the absence of any information unsettled me. I turned it in my hands, shaking it gently. Something was inside, small capsules or pills, but I had no way of knowing what they were. I considered turning around and going back to the pharmacy, Maybe it was just a mistake, an extra bottle meant for someone else. But something about it didn't feel accidental. I placed it back in the bag, deciding to check it when I got home. When I arrived, I set the bag on the counter and pulled out both bottles. My prescription was exactly what I expected, the label listing my name and dosage. But the second bottle remained a mystery. The seal was intact, but it looked slightly worn, like it had been handled many times before. I hesitated before opening it. A part of me wanted to throw it away and forget about it, but another part, a darker curiosity, urged me to take a look. Carefully, I broke the seal and twisted the cap off. Inside were small, round, white pills completely unmarked. My stomach tightened. Prescription pills always had markings, some kind of identifier. These were blank, and that was never a good sign. I grabbed my phone, planning to call the pharmacy and ask about the mistake. But before I could dial, a thought crossed my mind. What if this wasn't a mistake? What if someone had put this in my bag on purpose? The idea sent a wave of unease through me. I had been coming to this pharmacy for years. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I checked the receipt, looking for any mention of a second prescription, but it only listed my usual medication. That meant this bottle wasn't in their system. It wasn't supposed to be there. My hands felt clammy as I set the bottle down. I told myself I was overthinking. It was just an accident, an extra bottle that had been misplaced. But then, my phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number appeared on my screen. 3 words. Do not take them. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the message, my pulse hammering. The timing was impossible to ignore. Someone knew I had the bottle. Someone was watching. I looked around my apartment, my mind racing. Was this a prank? A warning? I typed out a reply, my fingers unsteady. Who is this? The message sent, but no response came. The silence made my skin crawl. I needed answers. I grabbed my keys and headed back to the pharmacy. The drive felt longer this time, the city outside passing in a blur. When I arrived, I parked quickly and walked inside, my grip tightening around the bag. The same pharmacist from earlier was still at the counter. He looked up and smiled, but his expression faltered when he saw my face. I placed the bag on the counter and pulled out the unlabeled bottle. This was in my bag, I said. It's not mine. His brows knit together as he took the bottle, examining it closely. That's strange, he murmured. Let me check something. He turned to his computer, typing quickly, his frown deepening. A moment later, he shook his head. There's no record of this being dispensed, he said. We don't carry anything without labels. Are you sure you got it here? His voice held an edge of confusion, but something else too, nervousness. I nodded, my unease growing. You handed me the bag yourself. His fingers drummed against the counter as he thought. Then, almost hesitantly, he asked, Did you open it? The question made my stomach drop. Yes, I admitted. His jaw tightened. He lowered his voice, glancing around the pharmacy as if making sure no one was listening. Throw it away, he said. Don't take them. Don't even touch them again. A shiver ran through me. What's in them? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. And I don't want to know. The way he said it sent a bolt of fear through me. He was scared. I left the pharmacy, my heart pounding. The second I got home, I dumped the pills into the toilet and flushed. The bottle went straight into the trash. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. I kept my phone next to me, half expecting another message. Hours passed in silence, but then, just as I started to drift off, my phone vibrated. Another message from the unknown number. Good choice. I sat up, my pulse hammering. My hands shook as I typed back. Who are you? What was in them? The message sent, but no reply came. I waited, the minutes stretching unbearably, but my screen remained dark. Morning came, but the unease stayed. I went about my day, trying to push the incident out of my mind. But as I stepped outside, something caught my eye. A car was parked across the street, its windows tinted. It hadn't been there before. As I walked to my car, the engine of the parked car started. My breath hitched. I forced myself to act normal, getting into my own vehicle. But as I pulled away, the car followed. I turned onto a busy street, hoping it was just a coincidence. But at every turn, it stayed behind me. My stomach twisted. I took a sudden detour, pulling into a gas station and parking in a crowded lot. The car passed without stopping. I sat there, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind racing. Whatever I had almost taken, it wasn't just a pharmacy mistake. Someone had wanted me to have those pills, and someone else had wanted to stop me. I never went back to that pharmacy. I changed my number, moved to a new apartment, tried to put it behind me. But sometimes I still get the feeling that I was just lucky, that I was given a warning, and I still wonder what would have happened if I had taken them. Story 18. I was scrolling through my social media feed when a message notification popped up. It was from a friend I hadn't spoken to in a while, asking why I had created a second account. Confused, I typed back, telling them I hadn't made any new profiles. A moment later, they sent me a screenshot, and my stomach dropped. The profile picture was mine. The cover photo was one I had taken last year. Everything about it looked like me, but the name was different, and the location was somewhere I had never been. I clicked on the link they provided, and as the fake profile loaded, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The page had dozens of photos, pictures of me, some recent, some years old. There were posts that mimicked things I might say, casual updates about my life. It was unsettling how well crafted it was, as if someone had studied me long enough to make it believable. I immediately reported the account, following the platform's steps to submit proof that I was the real person in the photos. My friends did the same, flooding the report system with complaints. I expected the account to disappear quickly, but instead, it stayed up. The longer it remained active, the more uneasy I felt. Later that night, another message came in, this time from a stranger. They asked if we had met before, claiming we had chatted a few days ago. I told them they must have been talking to the fake account. Their response made my skin crawl. They said we had spoken on a video call. That wasn't possible. I had never spoken to this person, let alone video chatted. But they insisted, even describing what I was wearing during the call. My hands trembled as I typed out my reply, asking if they had recorded it. They sent a short clip, and my breath caught in my throat. It was me, or at least it looked like me. The person in the video was sitting in a dimly lit room, their face mostly in shadow. They nodded, smiled, and spoke in a voice eerily similar to mine. But something was off. The movements were stiff, the expressions slightly unnatural. It felt like watching a distorted version of myself. I asked where they got the video, but they didn't answer. Instead, they blocked me, disappearing before I could press for details. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone deepfaked my face onto another person? Or had they somehow accessed old footage of me and manipulated it? Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that video playing over and over. I thought about all the pictures I had ever posted online, all the moments of my life that now felt stolen. Someone had been collecting my images for years, building this fake version of me. The next morning, I checked the fake profile again, half expecting it to be gone. It wasn't. Instead, it had updated with a new post, something vague about traveling to another city. The way it was written sent a chill through me. It wasn't just copying my old posts anymore. It was pretending to live my life in real time. I sent another round of reports, but the platform responded with a generic message saying the profile didn't violate their policies. Frustration boiled inside me. How could they not see how dangerous this was? This wasn't just identity theft, it felt like something worse. Determined to get answers, I started digging. I searched for any mentions of the fake account, checking through the friend list to see who had interacted with it. Most of the accounts were private, but a few were open. One name stood out, a man who had liked almost every post. I messaged him, pretending to be friendly, asking how he knew me. His reply was immediate, full of familiarity. He thought we had been talking for months. He even mentioned plans to meet soon. My heart pounded as I asked for details. He sent me a screenshot of his messages with the fake account, and I felt sick. The conversations were long, detailed, and personal. The imposter knew things about me that I had never posted online. They spoke about places I had been, favorite foods, childhood memories. My hands shook as I realized what this meant. Whoever was behind this wasn't just stealing my photos. They knew me. Panic set in as I started to think about how they could have gathered this information. I had someone I trusted betrayed me. Had they been watching me for years? The idea of being stalked, of someone observing my life from the shadows, made my skin crawl. I contacted the police, but they weren't much help. Online impersonation wasn't considered a serious crime unless money was involved. They suggested I take down my real account and be cautious about what I shared. But why should I have to erase myself while the imposter got to continue? Desperate, I reached out to a tech-savvy friend who knew about cybersecurity. They ran a search on the fake profile and found something unsettling. The account was linked to an IP address in my city. This person wasn't some random scammer from across the world. They were close. The thought of someone nearby pretending to be me made my stomach churn. I felt exposed, like a stranger could be watching me at any moment. I considered staying with a friend, but I didn't want to bring this nightmare into someone else's life. That night, I locked every door and covered my laptop's webcam. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, its screen glowing with missed notifications. I didn't check them. I couldn't handle any more disturbing messages. Morning came with a new horror. The fake account was gone. At first I felt relieved, but then I noticed something that sent me into a fresh wave of panic. My real account was gone too. It had been deleted overnight. I hadn't done it. I tried logging in, but my password no longer worked. Even my recovery email had been changed. It was as if I had been erased. My hands trembled as I realized what had happened. The imposter hadn't just been pretending to be me. They had taken over my identity completely. My phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. It was brief, only a few words, but they sent ice through my veins. No one will believe you now. Story 19. The house at the end of the street had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. Its windows were clouded with dust. The paint on the siding was peeling, and the front porch sagged under the weight of neglect. No one ever came or went. The neighbors avoided talking about it, and most acted as if it didn't even exist. I had walked past it countless times without a second thought. It was just another forgotten building, blending into the background of our quiet street. But last night something was different. As I glanced toward it on my way home, I saw a light on inside. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The glow came from an upstairs window, faint but unmistakable. For years, the house had been completely dark. No one was supposed to be there. Yet the light flickered as if someone was moving around. I stood there for a long moment, debating whether to get closer. The rational part of me said to ignore it, to keep walking and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my curiosity gnawed at me. I crossed the street, moving cautiously toward the overgrown yard. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air around the house was colder, as if the place itself resisted my presence. I stepped onto the cracked sidewalk leading to the front porch and peered through the grimy window. Nothing but darkness stared back at me. I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera, zooming in on the upstairs window. The light was still there, faint and flickering. My gut twisted. It almost looked like candlelight. But who would be inside an abandoned house, lighting candles in the middle of the night? A sudden creak made my stomach drop. The front door was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed before, but now it was open just enough to see the shadows beyond. I took a step back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Someone was inside. I turned and walked quickly back to my house, refusing to look over my shoulder. I locked my doors and checked the windows twice, but sleep didn't come easily. Every noise outside made me flinch. I kept picturing that dim light, the open door, the possibility that someone had been watching me. By morning, the light was gone. The house was dark and lifeless again, just as it had always been. I told myself I had imagined it, that maybe a trick of the streetlights had made it seem like something was there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something real. That evening, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Miss Connolly. She had lived on this street the longest, knew more about the house than anyone else. Her face paled the moment I brought it up. "No one's been in that house for years," she said. "Not since the last owners disappeared." A chill ran down my spine. "Disappeared?" I asked. She nodded, lowering her voice. "A couple lived there. Quiet, kept to themselves. One day they were just gone, left everything behind, no sign of them. The house has been empty ever since." I felt a lump form in my throat. Did anyone ever find out what happened? "No," she said, "and no one ever moved in after that." That night, I couldn't resist checking the house again. I stood at my bedroom window staring down the street. At first, it was dark. No movement, no lights. Then, just as I was about to turn away, the upstairs window flickered again. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in, but the light was too dim to make out anything clear. My stomach twisted as I noticed something else. The front door was wide open now. A shadow moved just behind the doorway. I jerked back from the window, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. Someone or something was inside that house. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of my house sent shivers down my spine. Around 2 a.m., I heard something outside. Soft footsteps on pavement. I forced myself to look out the window. A figure stood in the middle of the street, facing my house. My breath caught in my throat. It was too dark to see their face, but I could feel their gaze locked onto me. They didn't move, just stood there, staring. I shut the curtains and backed away, my hands shaking. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I even say? That someone was standing outside, watching. By the time they arrived, the figure would be gone. The next morning, I checked the house again. The front door was shut. The upstairs window was dark. There was no sign of anyone. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. I decided to do some digging. At the library, I searched through old newspapers. Eventually, I found an article about the couple who had lived there. Their names were Daniel and Evelyn Carter. In 1998, they vanished without a trace. Their cars were still in the driveway, their belongings untouched. The case remained open, but no leads ever surfaced. The strangest part, one neighbor reported seeing a light in the upstairs window the night before they disappeared. The same window I had seen it in. I slammed the book shut, my pulse hammering. This wasn't just an abandoned house. Something was wrong with it. That night, I forced myself not to look outside. I locked my doors, closed every curtain. But at 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No words, just a picture. A photo of my house, taken from the street. I stared at it, my skin crawling. I hadn't told anyone about the lights, hadn't mentioned the figure watching me. Yet something knew I had been watching back. I barely slept. By morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't staying here another night. I packed a bag, ready to leave for a few days. But as I stepped outside, my blood ran cold. My front door was open. Just a crack. And like someone had been inside. Like someone wanted me to know. Story 20. The rain was coming down in thick sheets as I stepped onto the curb, pulling my jacket tighter around me. My rideshare was supposed to arrive any second, and I didn't want to stand out in the cold longer than necessary. A black sedan pulled up, matching the description in the app, and I hurried over. The driver didn't roll the window down, but I could see his silhouette in the dim glow of the dashboard. I yanked open the door and slid into the back seat, shaking off the raindrops clinging to my sleeves. "For Claire?" I asked, just to confirm. The driver didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the rearview mirror, his dark eyes meeting mine. Then, after a long pause, he smiled. It wasn't the friendly kind of smile you'd expect from a rideshare driver. It was small, tight-lipped, almost knowing. Something about it made my skin prickle. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. My stomach clenched. He should have already known. I glanced at the app, making sure I had gotten into the right car. The license plate matched, but something felt wrong. My driver's name was supposed to be Mark. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man's smile didn't waver. He simply tapped a finger against the steering wheel, as if considering his answer. "You're Claire, right?" he finally said. He still hadn't told me his name. My heartbeat thumped hard in my chest. Something about the way he said it, like he wasn't confirming, but rather making sure I believed it, sent a chill through me. I reached for the door handle, but the lock clicked down before I could pull it. My breath hitched as I stared at the small, illuminated button beside me. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted. "I'm going to get out." The driver let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "But you just got in," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Why don't you tell me where you're going?" His fingers drummed against the wheel, slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me. I pressed the unlock button, but nothing happened. My hands were damp, slick with sweat. I forced a shaky breath and tried to stay calm. "I need you to unlock the door," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "Now." "Wow." The man exhaled sharply, the sound almost amused. Then he leaned forward, tapping something on the dashboard. A moment later, my phone vibrated in my lap. I glanced down and felt my stomach drop. The ride had been canceled. He had canceled it. I was no longer on record as being in this car. My location was no longer being tracked. My hands clenched into fists as I fought the rising fear in my chest. "Let me out," I demanded, trying to sound as steady as possible. The driver watched me for a moment before finally sighing. "All right," he said, reaching for something near the gear shift. My muscles tensed, ready to react. But instead of a weapon, he simply pressed a button. The doors unlocked with a soft click. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open and stumbled onto the wet pavement, nearly slipping as I scrambled backward. The driver stayed where he was, watching me through the open door. That same eerie smile stretched across his face. "Be careful out there, Claire," he murmured before pulling the door shut. The car didn't speed off. It simply rolled forward at a slow, almost taunting pace before disappearing around the corner. My whole body was shaking as I pulled out my phone and tried to report what had happened. But when I checked the app, the ride history was gone. It was as if I had never gotten into that car at all. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I imagined it? No. The feeling of the locked door, the weight of his gaze, the way he had smiled, it had all been real. I walked quickly to the nearest well-lit area, my hands trembling as I texted a friend to come get me. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but my heart was still pounding. Every set of headlights that passed made me flinch. By the time my friend arrived, I felt like I was on the verge of hyperventilating. I climbed into her car, barely able to explain what had happened. She listened in stunned silence before shaking her head. "That's terrifying," she said. "Are you sure you got into the right car?" I hesitated. It looked right. The license plate matched, but the way he acted, I swallowed hard. Something was off. She drove me home, but even as I stepped into the safety of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I checked my locks twice before heading to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the app again, scrolling through my past rides, looking for any trace of the ride that had disappeared. Nothing. It was as if it had been erased completely. But then, a notification popped up. My stomach twisted as I read it. "Your driver has arrived." I hadn't ordered a ride. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message. "You forgot something in the car." My blood ran cold. I hadn't left anything behind. A loud knock at my door made me jump. My heart pounded as I crept toward the peephole, my hands shaking. The hallway was empty. I stood there for what felt like forever, waiting for another knock, another sound. But none came. After a long moment, I slowly turned the deadbolt and backed away from the door. The message was still open on my phone, the text staring back at me like a taunt. I hovered over the app, debating whether to respond, to block the sender, to delete my account entirely. But before I could do anything, another message appeared. "See you soon, Claire." I dropped my phone. Outside, down the darkened street, a black sedan sat idling, the same one from the night before. And behind the wheel, the driver smiled. Story 21. The hike had been uneventful until I spotted something half buried beneath a pile of leaves. At first, I thought it was just another piece of trash, maybe a lost piece of camping gear. But as I brushed the leaves aside, my fingers closed around something smooth and worn, an old leather wallet. The edges were cracked and the color had faded, but it was still intact. I glanced around, wondering if someone had recently lost it, but the forest was empty. It didn't look like it had been dropped recently. The leather was stiff with age, and dirt had settled into its creases. Curiosity got the best of me, and I flipped it open. Inside, a faded driver's license stared back at me. The name was barely legible, but the photo was still clear enough to make out the face. The man on the ID had short brown hair and a serious expression. The license had expired years ago. A few crumpled bills were tucked into the wallet's folds, along with some old receipts. My stomach twisted as I realized how long this must have been out here. I pulled out my phone and typed the name into a search engine, expecting nothing more than an old address. What I found made my blood run cold. The first result was a missing persons report. The man had vanished 10 years ago without a trace. His last known location: the very woods I was standing in. A chill crawled down my spine as I stared at the screen, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I looked around again, this time with a growing sense of unease. The forest, which had seemed peaceful moments ago, now felt different. The trees loomed taller, their branches casting long, skeletal shadows. It was as if the very air had thickened, pressing in around me. I swallowed hard and glanced back at the wallet, my fingers trembling. What had happened to him? Had he gotten lost? Had someone taken him? The thought made me shiver. I debated what to do. I could take the wallet to the police, but part of me hesitated. If this had been here for a decade, had anyone ever searched these woods properly? A sudden rustling in the underbrush made me freeze. My heart pounded as I turned toward the sound. A squirrel darted out from the brush, but the fear remained. I was suddenly very aware of how alone I was. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like whispers. I took a shaky breath and stuffed the wallet into my backpack. I needed to get back to my car and figure out my next move. The trail seemed longer on the way back, every sound amplified, every shadow stretching unnaturally. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and pulled out my phone again. I reread the missing persons report, my hands still shaking. The man had been last seen by a friend who claimed he'd planned to go hiking alone. His car had been found near the trailhead, but no other traces had ever surfaced. Until now. I dialed the local police station before I could talk myself out of it. The officer on the other end listened as I explained what I had found. His tone remained calm, but there was a pause before he responded. "Can you bring the wallet in?" he asked. His voice was careful, measured. I hesitated but agreed. The drive to the station felt surreal. The world outside my window blurred together, my mind still trapped in the eerie silence of the woods. When I arrived, the officer took the wallet, flipping through it with a thoughtful expression. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked. I described the location as best as I could. He nodded, scribbling down notes. "We searched those woods when he first went missing," he said slowly. "We didn't find much." He looked at me, his gaze sharp. "Did you see anything else? Anything unusual?" The way he asked made my stomach clench. I shook my head, but I wasn't entirely sure that was the truth. Something about those woods had felt wrong, as if I hadn't been alone. He closed the wallet and set it aside. "We'll send a team out there," he said. "See if anything else turns up." I left the station with an uneasy feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faded picture on the ID, the empty woods stretching endlessly around me. At some point, exhaustion won and I drifted off. A loud knock at my door jolted me awake. My heart slammed against my ribs as I sat up, disoriented. The clock read 3:12 a.m. I waited, barely breathing. Another knock came, slow and deliberate. I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. The porch was empty, my stomach twisted. I knew I had heard it, felt it, even. My skin prickled as I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to lock every door and window. The next morning I got a call from the police. They had gone to the spot I described. "We found something," the officer said, his voice heavier than before. "There was a shallow grave. It's been there a while." My breath caught in my throat. "Do you think it's him?" I asked. "We won't know until we run tests," he said. But given the location, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I knew. I hung up, my hands trembling. That should have been the end of it. But the following night, I woke to the feeling of someone standing in my room. The air was thick, pressing down on me like a weight. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then just for a second I swore I heard a whisper. My name. The lights flickered, and just like that, the presence was gone. I sat up, gasping for air, my skin damp with sweat. The room was silent, too silent. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day I checked the news. The remains were confirmed to be the missing hiker. The case was officially closed. But for me, it wasn't over. Because sometimes late at night, I still feel that weight in the air. Still hear my name, spoken from lips long buried beneath the earth. Story 22. When I moved into the house, the basement door was already locked. The landlord had mentioned it in passing, saying it had been that way for years. I didn't question it much, assuming whatever was down there wasn't worth the trouble. But something about it unsettled me, an unspoken presence lurking just beyond the threshold. Days turned into weeks, and I barely thought about the basement. The house itself was old, with creaking floors and walls that groaned with every shift in the wind. At night, I would sometimes hear faint noises, scratching, shuffling, but I told myself it was just the house settling. The thought of anything else made my skin crawl. Then, one night I heard it. A soft click, distinct and deliberate. My heart froze as I turned my head toward the basement door at the end of the hallway. It stood there, closed as always, but something felt different, like the air had shifted, heavy with something unseen. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The house was silent now, save for the ticking of the clock on my nightstand. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I slid out of bed and crept toward the hallway. My bare feet met the cold wood floor, and with every step, my pulse quickened. Reaching the basement door, I hesitated. The doorknob looked the same, its brass surface dulled with age, but my gut told me it had moved. Slowly, I wrapped my fingers around it and turned. To my horror, the knob gave way easily, the lock undone. I sucked in a sharp breath and yanked my hand back. The door didn't budge on its own, but something told me it wanted to. My skin prickled with an overwhelming sense of being watched, though I was alone. I backed away, returning to my room and locking the door behind me. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every small creak made my muscles tense, my mind running wild with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. I told myself I'd check the door in the morning, make sure it was still locked. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be. Morning came, bringing with it an eerie stillness. I stepped into the hallway, my stomach twisting into knots. The basement door was slightly ajar now, no longer sealed tight. The sliver of darkness beyond it felt like an open mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I couldn't leave it like that. With shaking hands, I pushed it shut, but when I tried locking it, the mechanism wouldn't catch. The key was nowhere to be found, and I didn't remember ever seeing one. A chill ran down my spine as I realized whatever had unlocked it hadn't needed a key. For the rest of the day, I avoided the basement door entirely. I went about my routine as best as I could, but unease sat heavy in my chest. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting the door to be open again. The idea that it might not stay closed filled me with dread. That night, I made sure to wedge a chair against it before going to bed. It was a small thing, but it made me feel safer. As I lay under my covers, I listened, every nerve on edge. The wind outside howled, but inside all was quiet. Too quiet. And taint. Sometime in the night, I woke to the sound of wood scraping against wood. My blood ran cold as I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The chair, the one I had placed against the basement door, was moving. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that my sleep-addled mind was playing tricks on me. But then came the unmistakable sound of the door creaking open. The air in my room turned thick, pressing down on me like unseen hands. My body screamed to move, but I couldn't. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to be my own. They stopped just outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would give me away. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing whatever was there to leave. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the presence was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, only daring to move when the first rays of morning light filtered through my window. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I stepped into the hallway. The basement door stood wide open now, gaping like a wound in the house. The chair I had placed against it was toppled over, as if something had forced its way through. I peered down the staircase, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the first few steps. A damp, musty scent wafted up, making my stomach churn. Something was down there, something that had been waiting, and now it was free. I grabbed my keys and left the house without looking back. My landlord never mentioned a previous tenant, but I knew I wouldn't be the last. Whatever was in that basement had found a way out, and it wasn't going back. Story 23. The day started like any other. I was in my second period history class, half listening to the teacher's lecture while doodling in my notebook. The classroom was warm, the kind of warmth that made it hard to stay awake. Outside, the sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows over the desks. Then, without warning, the intercom crackled to life. There was no voice, no announcement, just a faint, static-filled click before it cut off again. A few students exchanged confused looks, but the teacher kept talking as if nothing had happened. I figured it was just a glitch until the classroom door suddenly locked with a sharp, mechanical click. Our teacher, Mr. Lawson, froze mid-sentence. He glanced at the door, his expression unreadable, before quickly shutting off the projector. "Everyone away from the windows," he said, his voice calm but firm. The class hesitated for a second too long. "Now," he added, and that was enough to send us scrambling. Desks scraped against the floor as we hurried to the far corner of the room. My pulse quickened as I crouched against the wall, my back pressed against the cool plaster. Something about this didn't feel like a drill. There had been no warning, no official lockdown procedure announced over the intercom. Mr. Lawson turned off the lights and knelt near the door, his eyes fixed on the narrow window beside it. The hall outside was eerily silent. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and shallow. Someone next to me whispered, "What's going on?" But no one had an answer. Minutes passed, stretching unbearably long. I pulled my phone from my pocket, keeping it low to the ground. No new messages, no alerts. The school's website had no updates either. Usually lockdowns were due to drills or an outside threat, but this one had no explanation. Then, from somewhere in the hallway, a sound broke the silence. A single, dragging footstep. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. It didn't sound like normal footsteps, more like someone moving awkwardly, their weight shifting unevenly with each step. I glanced at Mr. Lawson, but he didn't react. His eyes remained fixed on the door, his hand gripping his phone tightly. He wasn't calling anyone. He wasn't explaining anything. A cold, creeping fear settled into my chest. Why wasn't he telling us what was happening? More footsteps followed, slow, deliberate. A shadow passed by the thin window in the door, its shape distorted by the frosted glass. It wasn't a teacher. It wasn't a student. The figure was too tall, too broad-shouldered, and its movements were all wrong. Someone in the back of the room let out a small gasp. The shadow stopped. My stomach clenched as I held my breath, willing myself not to make a sound. The handle of the door rattled once, twice. Then silence. Nobody moved. I felt my hands shaking as I clutched my phone, my fingers cold and stiff. Whoever was out there wasn't supposed to be. I could tell by the way Mr. Lawson's jaw clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped his phone. He knew something. The shadow shifted again, then moved away from the door. The footsteps grew fainter until they disappeared entirely. Still, no one relaxed. The classroom remained deathly silent, waiting for some kind of signal that it was over. None came. I checked my phone again, hoping for a message, a news alert, anything. But my screen remained empty. No one was calling the police. No sirens echoed outside. If something dangerous was happening, why wasn't the school doing anything about it? Then, without warning, the classroom door unlocked. The sharp metallic click sent a jolt through me. Mr. Lawson hesitated, then motioned for us to stay still. His face was pale now, his hands visibly shaking. He reached for the handle, testing it carefully. The door swung open slightly, revealing the empty hallway beyond. The lights in the hall flickered once before stabilizing. From where I sat, I could see the other classroom doors still locked, their windows dark. It was like our room had been singled out. Mr. Lawson stepped into the hallway, peering both ways before retreating quickly. He pressed the door shut again, locking it manually this time. "Stay here," he whispered, barely audible. The tension in the room thickened. None of us dared to ask what he had seen. More time passed. I had no idea how long we sat there, waiting. My legs had gone numb, my head pounding from the stress. Then, finally, the intercom crackled again. This time a voice came through, but it wasn't the principal's. It was distorted, low, like someone was speaking too close to the microphone. "Return to normal activities." The message was short, clipped. The intercom shut off immediately after. A chill ran through me. That wasn't how lockdowns ended. There was always a follow-up announcement, an explanation. But this was nothing. Mr. Lawson looked hesitant but finally stood. "All right, everyone, back to your seats." His voice was tight, forced. We moved slowly, unsure if we should trust that it was really over. The moment I sat down, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. The rest of the school day passed in a haze. No one spoke about what had happened. Teachers acted as if nothing was wrong. I heard whispers between students, but no one had any real answers. It was like we were all pretending it never happened. When the final bell rang, I rushed outside, my eyes scanning the parking lot. I expected to see police, news vans, anything, but there was nothing. The world outside the school looked completely normal, as if the lockdown had never happened. That night, I searched online for any mention of the incident. No one had posted about it. There were no reports, no discussions, no official statement from the school. It was like it had been erased, like it had never happened at all. I barely slept. The sound of those dragging footsteps haunted me. The way the door had unlocked on its own. The shadow that had stood just inches away from where I sat, separated only by a thin layer of glass. The next morning, I walked into school with a knot in my stomach. Everything looked the same. My classmates were tired but acting normal. I made my way to history class, hesitating before stepping inside. Mr. Lawson wasn't there. A substitute sat at his desk, flipping through a textbook. "Where's Mr. Lawson?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The substitute glanced up. "He took an unexpected leave," she said. "He won't be back for a while." I sat down slowly, my heart hammering. Mr. Lawson had known something. He had seen something. And now he was gone. Story 24. The flight was long and I was exhausted, hoping to get some sleep before landing. But every time I shifted in my seat, I felt eyes on me. A man a few rows ahead kept turning to look in my direction, his gaze unsettlingly steady. At first, I told myself it was nothing, maybe he was just zoning out, but as the hours passed, his focus never wavered. I tried to ignore it, keeping my eyes on the small in-flight screen in front of me. Every now and then, I glanced in his direction, only to find him still watching. His expression was neutral, neither friendly nor hostile, just intent. I adjusted in my seat and looked around, wondering if anyone else had noticed, but no one seemed to care. When the flight attendant passed, I considered mentioning it, but what would I even say? Instead, I pretended to sleep, hoping he'd lose interest. Even with my eyes closed, I could feel it, an unwavering presence locked onto me. The discomfort sat like a weight on my chest, making the air feel heavier with each breath. As soon as the plane landed, I unbuckled my seatbelt, eager to get off. The moment the doors opened, I grabbed my bag and made my way down the aisle, resisting the urge to turn around. I told myself it was fine, that once I was off the plane, he'd disappear into the crowd like everyone else. But as I stepped into the terminal, I had the overwhelming sense that he wasn't far behind. I walked briskly toward baggage claim, weaving through the sea of people. Every so often I glanced back, my pulse quickening when I spotted him a few paces away. He wasn't holding a phone, wasn't talking to anyone, just walking, his eyes locked on me. The space between us never grew nor shrank, as if he was matching my every step. Baggage claim was crowded, the carousel slowly spitting out suitcases as travelers gathered around. I stood near the edge, forcing myself to focus on the bags rather than the unsettling presence lingering nearby. My suitcase finally appeared, and I reached for it, my fingers curling tightly around the handle. Then I turned, expecting him to be gone, but he was still there. He stood a few feet away, his hands empty. No suitcase, no carry-on, nothing. My stomach twisted at the realization he had no reason to be here. The plane was full of passengers retrieving their belongings, chatting, reuniting with loved ones. But he stood alone, motionless, just watching me. I forced myself to stay calm, adjusting my grip on my suitcase before moving toward the exit. My heart pounded as I stepped into the terminal, keeping my pace steady but quick. I could hear footsteps behind me, unhurried but deliberate. He was following me, and now there was no mistaking it. The airport was still busy, but the crowds thinned as I made my way toward the rideshare pickup zone. I clutched my phone, pretending to be occupied with it while stealing glances in the reflection of the glass doors. He was still there, not closing the distance but not falling behind either. My throat was dry, my mind racing with what to do next. I veered toward the nearest group of people, hoping safety in numbers would make him reconsider. But he lingered, keeping his distance, waiting. My ride wasn't set to arrive for another 10 minutes, and the thought of standing in one place made my skin crawl. I had to do something, anything, to shake him. Spotting a restroom sign, I ducked inside without hesitation. My pulse thundered in my ears as I locked myself in a stall, my breath shallow and uneven. I pulled out my phone and opened my rideshare app, changing the pickup location at the last second. If he was watching me, he'd expect me to leave through the same doors, but I wouldn't be there. Minutes passed before I felt brave enough to step out. I moved cautiously, scanning the area, but he was nowhere in sight. Relief flooded through me as I hurried toward the new pickup point, my eyes darting around for any sign of him. When my car pulled up, I wasted no time throwing my suitcase in the trunk and getting inside. As the driver merged onto the main road, I dared one last glance out the window. My breath caught in my throat. He was there, standing at the curb, watching as my car sped away. His face remained unreadable, his posture relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself it was over, that he hadn't followed me. But as I arrived at my destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow this wasn't the end. Even as I closed the door behind me, locking it twice, I felt that presence, lingering just out of sight. Story 25. The hospital was quiet that night, the halls dimly lit with only the soft hum of machines filling the silence. I had been an intern for 2 months, accustomed to long shifts and strange occurrences, but nothing had prepared me for what happened that night. I was doing my usual rounds when I reached room 309, a patient's room I had checked on just the night before. When I stepped inside, the bed was empty, the sheets neatly tucked as if no one had been there. My first thought was that the patient had been transferred or taken for tests, but there were no signs of recent activity. Confused, I walked back to the nurse's station and checked the records to see where they had been moved. The screen displayed something that made my stomach drop. The patient, Mr. Albright, had been discharged 4 days ago. That couldn't be right. I had checked on him the night before, spoken to him even. His pale face, his weak voice, it was all still fresh in my mind. I scanned the system again, verifying the details, but everything confirmed he had left. A strange chill crawled down my spine as I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe I had mixed up the rooms, but deep down I knew I hadn't. Determined to figure out what was going on, I headed to the charge nurse on duty. I asked about Mr. Albright, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced at me, puzzled, before confirming the records he had been discharged, and no new patient had been assigned to that room since. A sense of unease settled in my chest as I decided to check the security cameras. If someone had mistakenly placed a new patient in the room, there would be a record of it. I made my way to the security office, where the night guard, an older man named Rick, greeted me with a tired nod. I explained the situation, and Rick sighed as he pulled up the footage from the previous night. We fast-forwarded through hours of recordings, my breath catching when we reached the time of my last rounds. There I was, entering room 309, just as I remembered. But the footage showed something impossible. The bed was empty even then. I stood in the room, speaking, gesturing as if someone was in front of me, but there was no one there. I felt the blood drain from my face as Rick slowly turned to look at me. "You sure you weren't just exhausted?" he asked, though his voice held uncertainty. I wanted to believe that, but I could still hear Mr. Albright's weak voice in my head. I could remember the way he had looked at me, the way he had thanked me for checking in on him. I didn't know what to say, so I just shook my head and left the security office. My legs felt unsteady as I walked back toward the patient wing, my mind racing with possibilities. Had I imagined the entire thing? Was I so overworked that I had hallucinated a patient? I found myself back in front of room 309, staring at the door as if it held the answers. Steeling myself, I stepped inside once more. The air felt colder, heavier somehow, and my breath hitched as I heard the faintest sound, a whisper. It was barely there, almost like a sigh carried by the wind, but it sent a shiver through me. I turned quickly, scanning the room, but there was no one. My pulse pounded in my ears as I backed away and shut the door behind me. I returned to the nurse's station, hesitant to tell anyone what I had experienced. I was just an intern who would believe me. Instead, I pulled up Mr. Albright's file again, trying to make sense of everything. I found his emergency contact listed as his daughter, so I decided to take a risk and call her. When she answered, I introduced myself and hesitantly asked about her father. There was a long pause before she spoke. "My father passed away the night before his discharge," she said quietly. The hospital had already prepared his paperwork, but he never made it out. A cold dread settled in my bones. I thanked her and hung up, staring blankly at the screen. Mr. Albright had died that night, but I had spoken to him afterward. I had seen him, heard him, and yet he wasn't really there. The realization sent a wave of nausea through me. I needed to step away, to clear my head, but as I turned from the computer, I felt a strange sensation. It was as if someone was watching me, standing just over my shoulder. I refused to look back. Instead, I walked away, forcing myself to focus on my next rounds, pretending as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, I knew I would never forget that night. The next morning, I checked room 309 one last time. The bed remained empty, the air still heavy with something unseen. I whispered a quiet goodbye before stepping out, hoping that whatever lingered there could finally find peace. I never spoke of it again, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear his voice whispering from the empty room, thanking me for checking in on him one last time. Story 26. It was a quiet evening when I heard the knock at my front door. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, but I got up from the couch and walked to the door anyway. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man in a brown uniform standing on my porch, holding a medium-sized box. His hat was pulled low over his face, and his posture was stiff. Something felt off, but I couldn't immediately place why. The box in his hands had no visible label or markings, which was unusual for a delivery. I hesitated for a second before unlocking the door and opening it just enough to see him clearly. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my foot wedged against the door. The man offered a tight-lipped smile. "Package for you," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. He didn't extend the box toward me, nor did he ask for a signature. He just stood there, holding the package as if waiting for me to make the first move. A prickling unease crept up my spine. "I didn't order anything," I said, glancing at the box again. It was completely blank, no shipping label, no company branding, nothing. I met his gaze, and for the first time I noticed how oddly still he was. He wasn't shifting his weight or checking a clipboard like most delivery drivers did. He was just watching me. "Maybe someone sent you something," he replied, his tone eerily casual. He stepped forward slightly, just enough for me to instinctively lean back. The movement was small, but it set off alarms in my head. My grip tightened on the door handle, and I forced a polite smile. "Who's it from?" He paused, as if he hadn't expected the question. "It doesn't say," he finally answered. His fingers curled slightly around the edges of the box, and I realized he wasn't even trying to hand it over. He was just holding it, like a prop. The air felt heavier now, and my instincts screamed at me to end the conversation. I took a small step back. "I don't think this is for me," I said. "You might have the wrong house." His expression didn't change, but I noticed the way his shoulders tensed. It was a subtle shift, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. "You're sure?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. The way he said it sent a chill through me. He wasn't confirming an address. He was trying to keep me engaged. My hand tightened around the edge of the door, and I started pushing it closed. The moment I moved, his free hand shot out, stopping the door from shutting completely. My breath caught in my throat as I realized how strong his grip was. "Hey," I snapped, my voice sharper now. "Let go of the door." For a split second, we locked eyes. His were dark, unreadable, but I saw something behind them: calculation. He wasn't here to deliver anything. He was testing me, seeing how much he could get away with. My heart pounded as I pushed harder, and finally he released the door and took a step back. "Must been a mistake," he said, his voice smooth, too controlled. He held up the box, then set it down carefully on the porch. "Sorry about that." Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the steps, disappearing down the sidewalk. I stood there, gripping the doorknob, watching him until he rounded the corner. I locked the door immediately, my hand shaking slightly as I stepped back. Something was very wrong about that encounter. I reached for my phone and pulled up the security camera app. The front porch camera had caught the entire exchange, but as I replayed the footage, my stomach twisted. The man had approached my house from the side yard, not from the street. That meant he hadn't come from a delivery truck. He had come from somewhere else, somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. My hands tightened around my phone as I fast-forwarded the footage, watching him walk away. He never went to another house. He never even looked around as if he were checking addresses. He had come specifically to my door. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe he had the wrong house and was just acting strangely. But I knew deep down that wasn't the case. There had been intent in his actions, in the way he spoke, in how he had tried to keep me talking. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I glanced at the box still sitting on my porch. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't just leave it there. Grabbing a pair of gloves from the kitchen, I cautiously opened the door again and crouched down beside it. It was lighter than I expected, too light for something supposedly being delivered. Carefully, I lifted the lid. My breath hitched. The box was completely empty. There was nothing inside, no packing slip, no filler, just an empty cardboard shell. A cold dread settled in my stomach. He had never been here to deliver anything. The box was just a pretense, a way to make me let my guard down. I backed into the house and locked the door again, my mind racing. I needed to call someone, the police, maybe, but what would I even tell them? That a strange man with an empty box had come to my door. They might not take it seriously. As I debated what to do, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and my blood ran cold. It was a notification from my security system motion detected in the backyard. My hands trembled as I pulled up the live feed. The screen flickered for a second before focusing, and then I saw him. The fake delivery man was standing just beyond the back fence, watching my house. He wasn't moving, wasn't even trying to hide. He was just standing there, waiting. I scrambled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked while they sent someone over. I did exactly that, every muscle in my body tensed as I kept my eyes on the screen. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, my ears straining for any sound. Finally, red and blue lights flashed through my windows, and I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. By the time the officers checked the backyard, he was gone. One of the officers took my statement while another reviewed the security footage. They told me they'd increase patrols in the area and advised me to stay alert. But as they drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next day, I installed additional locks and motion sensors around my house. I kept my curtains drawn and double-checked my cameras constantly. I never saw him again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been there for a reason. I didn't know what he had wanted that night, maybe to get inside, maybe something worse. But the fact that he had come prepared with an empty box, a fake uniform, and a calculated approach made it clear he had done this before, and he would do it again. And fall out again. Story 27. My dog Rocky was usually a heavy sleeper. He never barked at night unless something was really wrong. So when I woke up to his low growls and the sharp sound of his nails scratching against the floor, I knew something had disturbed. My heart pounded as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through my curtains. Rocky stood rigid by the bedroom window, his ears perked, his body tense. His growls deepened, and then he let out a sharp bark. My pulse quickened as I threw off the covers and walked toward him. I hesitated before pulling the curtain back. A cold draft seeped through the glass, making my skin prickle. When I finally looked outside, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the fresh layer of snow, were footprints leading directly up to my window. I scanned the yard, my breath fogging up the glass. The footprints were deep, distinct, and undeniably human. But something was wrong. There were no tracks leading away. My stomach clenched as I tried to make sense of it. Whoever had been standing outside my window hadn't walked away. Rocky barked again, his eyes locked onto the footprints. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think rationally. Maybe the wind had covered the exit tracks. Maybe I was half asleep and imagining things. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The snow had fallen evenly all night. There was no wind, no reason for only one set of footprints to exist. A sudden paranoia gripped me, and I took a step back from the window. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the flashlight app. I hesitated, then turned it on, shining the beam outside. The footprints became even clearer under the light. They stopped just inches from the base of my window. The snow around them was undisturbed. It was as if someone had simply appeared there, stood for a while, and then vanished. I turned the flashlight toward the yard, scanning the trees near the edge of my property. The shadows stretched long and deep, their movements tricking my eyes. But nothing was there, no signs of anyone hiding. Still, the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I stepped back, locking my window out of instinct. Rocky was still tense, his fur bristling. He kept his eyes on the window, his growls low and warning. I patted his head, trying to reassure him, but the truth was, I needed the reassurance more. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone had left footprints outside my window and disappeared into thin air. There was no crime, no evidence of a break-in, just a growing sense of dread that I couldn't explain. I forced myself back into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Rocky stayed by the window, his watchful presence both comforting and unsettling. Every few minutes I glanced toward the glass, expecting to see something or someone staring back. But the footprints remained untouched, and the night dragged on in eerie silence. Morning came slowly, the first light of dawn casting a pale glow over the snow-covered ground. When I finally got out of bed, Rocky followed me to the window, his body still tense. I hesitated before looking outside again. The footprints were still there, frozen in place, but something had changed. A second set of tracks had appeared circling the first ones. My breath caught as I followed the new tracks with my eyes. They twisted and turned, looping around the original footprints in an erratic pattern. A wave of nausea hit me. Someone had come back during the night, and I hadn't heard a thing. I rushed to the front door, yanking it open despite the icy air. Rocky barked at my side, but I barely heard him. My eyes were fixed on the snow, on the chaotic mess of footprints outside my window. They circled the first set over and over, as if whoever had made them had been pacing, watching, waiting. I forced myself to step closer, my breath coming in short gasps. The second set of prints didn't lead away either. And just like the first ones, they started and ended in the same spot. My stomach turned as I tried to make sense of it. Someone had been there, and then somehow they had disappeared without a trace. A sudden rustling sound came from the trees, and I spun toward the noise, my heart hammering. The woods stood silent, the bare branches swaying gently in the cold morning breeze. I swallowed hard, scanning the tree line, but nothing moved. Rocky let out a low growl beside me. His ears were pinned back, his body rigid. He was staring at something I couldn't see. My gut told me to listen to him. Whatever had been outside my window last night wasn't gone. I backed away slowly, pulling Rocky with me. Once inside, I locked the door and grabbed my phone with shaking hands. This time, I wasn't hesitating. I dialed the police, my fingers numb against the screen. The dispatcher listened patiently as I explained what had happened. There was a long pause before she responded. "We'll send someone over," she said. Her voice was calm, but something about it felt off. I waited anxiously, pacing the living room while Rocky stayed glued to my side. It took nearly an hour before a patrol car finally pulled into my driveway. A tall officer stepped out, his expression unreadable as I led him to the footprints. He studied them in silence, his eyes darkening slightly. "No tracks leading away," he murmured, almost to himself. He knelt down, brushing his fingers lightly over the indentations in the snow. Then he stood and looked at me. "Has this happened before?" he asked. I shook my head, my pulse still racing. "No," I said. "At least not that I know of." He frowned, glancing toward the trees before turning back to me. "Keep your doors locked," he said. "And if anything else happens, call us immediately." His words sent another chill through me. He didn't say it was a prank. He didn't say it was nothing. He simply told me to be careful. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made my skin prickle. Rocky stayed by my side, his ears twitching at the slightest sound. The footprints remained outside, a stark reminder of the visitor that had no explanation. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing else happened. The snow eventually melted, erasing the tracks. But I never shook the feeling that someone had been there, watching, waiting. And even now, every time Rocky barks at the window, my stomach tightens with fear. Because deep down, I know whatever came that night wasn't just passing through. And one day, it might come back. Story 28. I was exhausted by the time I arrived at the hotel. My flight had been delayed, my phone battery was nearly dead, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. The check-in process was quick, and the receptionist handed me my key card with a polite smile. I barely acknowledged her as I took my bag and headed toward the elevator. The hallway on my floor was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made me aware of my own footsteps. I found my room number and swiped the key card. The lock beeped, and the door clicked open with ease. As I stepped inside, I immediately froze. A man was sitting on the bed, staring at me. He wasn't startled or confused. He just looked at me as if he had been expecting me to walk in. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, but every instinct told me something was wrong. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake," I said, gripping the door handle. The man didn't answer. He just continued staring, his expression unreadable. I took a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was in the hallway. Before I could say anything else, he slowly stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his posture was rigid. My pulse quickened as I forced a nervous smile. "I must have the wrong room," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering my words. Then, he did something that made my blood run cold. He reached into his pocket. I didn't wait to see what he was pulling out. My survival instincts kicked in and I yanked the door shut, practically sprinting back down the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the elevator and jabbed the button frantically. When the doors finally slid open, I rushed inside, my hands shaking. The ride down felt agonizingly slow, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the man to follow. When the elevator dinged, I bolted straight to the front desk, barely able to catch my breath. "There's someone in my room," I said, my voice coming out in a panicked rush. The receptionist frowned, typing something into the computer. "That's not possible. The system says that room is vacant." I shook my head. "It's not. There's a man in there." He didn't say anything, he just stared at me. The receptionist exchanged a look with the security guard standing nearby. The guard nodded and gestured for me to follow. Together, we rode the elevator back up, and I stayed behind him as he approached the door. He knocked firmly. "Hotel security. Is anyone inside?" Silence. The guard knocked again, but there was no response. He swiped a master key card, and the door swung open. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the bathroom door was open, and my suitcase, still untouched, was by the closet. There was no sign that anyone had ever been inside. I felt my stomach twist. He was here. I swear, I saw him. The guard gave me a skeptical look, but stepped inside to check. After a moment, he turned back to me. "There's no one here. Are you sure you didn't walk into the wrong room?" Frustration bubbled up inside me, but I swallowed it down. I know what I saw. There was a man sitting right there on the bed. The receptionist shifted uncomfortably. "We can assign you a different room if that would make you feel safer." I nodded quickly. I didn't care about proving my point, I just wanted to get out of there. They handed me a new key, and the security guard escorted me to a different floor. As I stepped into the new room, I made sure to lock and deadbolt the door behind me. Lying in bed, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling under my skin. I kept replaying the encounter in my head. The way the man had stared at me, the way he had reached into his pocket. I checked every corner of the room, making sure no one was hiding inside. But even then, I barely slept. In the morning, I went downstairs for breakfast. The lobby was busy, full of travelers checking in and out. As I grabbed a cup of coffee, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned, scanning the room. And then I saw him. The same man from last night. He was sitting in a chair near the entrance, watching me. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. My grip on my coffee tightened as I forced myself to stay calm. I turned and walked straight to the front desk. "That man," I whispered to the receptionist. "The one by the entrance. Do you know him?" She glanced up, then back at me with a confused expression. "There's no one there." I spun around, my heart hammering. The chair was empty. The man was gone. A cold sweat broke out along my skin as the receptionist asked if I was okay. I nodded numbly, forcing myself to step away. For the rest of my stay, I never saw him again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been real, that he had been watching, and that somehow he had known I would come to that room. Story 29. I found the USB stick on my way home from work. It was lying on the sidewalk near my apartment building, half covered in dirt. At first I ignored it, thinking someone must have dropped it. But something about it nagged at me, and before I could talk myself out of it, I picked it up. It was an ordinary black USB, scratched and worn. There was no label, no indication of who it belonged to. I hesitated for a moment, then slipped it into my pocket. Curiosity got the best of me as soon as I got inside. I powered on my laptop and plugged it in. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled Watch. My stomach twisted. It felt wrong to open it, but my fingers moved before I could stop them. Inside there were several video files, all marked with dates from the past week. I clicked on the most recent one. The screen went black for a moment, then a grainy video began to play. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then, my heart clenched. It was me. The footage was from outside my office, showing me leaving work the night before. The timestamp in the corner was accurate, down to the minute. I watched myself walk to my car, unlock the door, and drive away. The video ended abruptly. My hands felt clammy as I clicked the next file. This one was from 2 days ago, capturing me inside a coffee shop. The angle was slightly tilted, as if the camera had been hidden in a bag or coat pocket. I saw myself sip my drink, check my phone, and look around the room. I swallowed hard. Someone had been following me, recording me. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I noticed anyone acting strangely? Had someone been too close to me, watching when they shouldn't have been? Nothing came to mind. I clicked another file. This one was different. It was taken from a low angle, showing my apartment door. The camera shook slightly, as if the person holding it was trying to keep still. A few seconds later, I appeared, unlocking the door and stepping inside. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming in short, panic bursts. This wasn't just some creepy coincidence. Someone had been outside my home. Someone knew where I lived. I forced myself to think rationally. The first thing I needed to do was check my apartment. My hands trembled as I searched every room, checking the windows, the locks, the closets. Nothing was out of place, but that didn't ease the knot in my stomach. I considered calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That I found a USB with footage of myself. That someone might be stalking me. There was no proof of who had taken the videos, no clear face or name. My laptop chimed. A notification. My stomach dropped as I saw the message on my screen. A new file had appeared on the USB. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't done anything. Yet there it was. The file was named Look. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, fear screaming at me to unplug the USB and throw it away. But I clicked it. The video started, showing a dark, grainy room. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the camera moved. It panned slowly, shakily, before settling on something. A chair. A chair in the center of the room. My chest tightened. Someone was sitting in it. My blood turned to ice as I realized who it was. Me. I was sitting in the chair, my head slumped forward, my hands resting on my lap. The camera zoomed in slightly, my face coming into focus. My expression was blank, my eyes closed. I looked lifeless. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I had no memory of this, no memory of being in this place, no memory of being filmed. My breath hitched as the camera zoomed even closer. Then my eyes in the video snapped open. I yanked the USB out of my laptop and threw it across the room. My chair scraped against the floor as I bolted upright. My reflection in the dark laptop screen looked pale, shaken. My chest heaved as I tried to convince myself that it wasn't real. But I knew better. The footage was too clear, too deliberate. Someone wanted me to see it. Someone wanted me to know. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking as I dialed the police. The call rang once, twice. Then the line cut off. A chill spread through me. My phone had full signal. There was no reason for the call to drop. A message popped up on my screen. No number, just words, "Stop looking." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. My stomach twisted. I needed to leave. Now. I stuffed my laptop into my bag and grabbed my keys. As I reached for the door, the sound stopped me cold. Footsteps. They were soft, deliberate, just outside my apartment. A shadow moved beneath the doorframe. My heart slammed against my ribs as I backed away. I needed a way out. The window. The fire escape. My mind raced through options. The doorknob rattled. My breath hitched. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, ready to swing if I had to. But the rattling stopped. The shadow outside my door shifted, then disappeared. Silence. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, my ears straining for any sound. Eventually I forced myself to move. I peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but I knew better than to believe I was alone. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise sent me into a panic. The next morning I packed a bag and left town, driving until the city was nothing but a blur in my rearview mirror. I threw the USB into a river miles away, but even as I watched it sink beneath the water, I knew it wasn't over. Because that night in my motel room my phone buzzed. A new message. No words, just a video. A video of me. Sitting in that chair. Waiting. Story 30. The library was nearly empty that night, just the way I liked it. The dim overhead lights cast long shadows between the shelves, and the only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustling of pages. I had a research paper due, and the silence helped me focus. Time seemed to slip away as I flipped through books, jotting down notes. A faint whisper broke the silence, barely audible over the quiet. My name. It was unmistakable. My spine stiffened as I turned my head, scanning the aisle behind me. There was no one there. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe I had imagined it. Spending hours alone in a quiet space could play tricks on the mind. I adjusted my chair, stretching my arms before returning to my work. Minutes passed, and then I heard it again. A breathy, hushed voice murmuring my name. This time it was closer. My heartbeat quickened as I turned around faster, expecting to see someone standing behind me. The aisle was still empty. I let out a nervous chuckle, feeling ridiculous. It was probably another student playing a joke. I stood up and walked to the end of the aisle, glancing left and right. The library was nearly deserted, save for an older librarian stacking books near the front desk. Shaking off the unease, I returned to my table and tried to refocus. My fingers tightened around my pen, forcing myself to concentrate. Then, from the far end of the room, I heard the whisper again. My name, drawn out slowly, barely more than a breath. My skin prickled as I turned sharply. The whisper had come from the stacks. I hesitated before standing, my curiosity outweighing my fear. The aisles were dim, the bookshelves towering around me like walls. I walked carefully, my eyes scanning the narrow gaps between books. Halfway down the aisle, I stopped. One of the books was pulled out slightly, as if someone had just been there. My pulse quickened as I reached for it. The moment my fingers brushed the spine, the book slid back into place on its own. I took a step back, my breath catching. The library was still empty. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't explain. I turned on my heel and walked quickly back to my seat, keeping my gaze forward. I gathered my things, stuffing my notes into my bag. Staying any longer didn't seem like a good idea. As I slung my bag over my shoulder, the whisper came again, so close. It felt like someone was breathing against my ear. My body went rigid. My name, said with certainty, said like I was expected. I spun around, my heart in my throat. No one. I bolted toward the front desk, my footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The librarian looked up, startled. "Everything all right?" she asked. I hesitated, debating whether to explain. Instead, I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, just tired," I mumbled. The lie felt thin. The librarian gave me a knowing look, as if she'd heard it before. I rushed toward the doors, glancing over my shoulder one last time. The library was still and silent, just as it had been all night. But something felt different now. Something felt watching. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I told myself I wouldn't come back so late again. But even as I walked to my car, the whisper lingered in my mind. My name spoken by something I couldn't see. And as I turned the key in the ignition, I swore I heard it again. This time from the back seat.